Chapter 523. In the forest, Xiaofan followed the footsteps of the two in front of him. According to Robber 11 and Robber 12, the treasure was found in an underground cave not far from the Yanjiao tribe. At that time, the two of them started from the drumming tribe and followed the Yanjiao team to the old haunt. They planned to get something from the Yanjiao team. Because they stole the Water Moon King stone from the Yanjiao tribe and other tribes, they had a lot of loot that affected their movements. They wanted to hide the loot first before continuing to follow the Yanjiao team. Just like before, they would find an inconspicuous place to hide the loot. When they were done, they would go back to dig up the loot and escape with it. It was at that time that they found an underground cave. Many tribes would find a place to dig underground caves. Some did it to hide food, some did it to prevent danger and build a place to hide. The place where the cave was located was probably where a small tribe used to live. But after the tribe moved or was destroyed, the cave was left behind. The cave was well hidden and uninhabited. It was surrounded by dense trees and bushes. If they didn't deliberately dig around to hide the treasure, they might not have found the cave. Now that Xiaofan wanted to know the location and promised to let them go as long as they led the way, Robber 11 and Robber 12 agreed. Robber 11 and Robber 12 had never been caught before. Even if they were discovered, they could escape quickly and hard to catch up with. This was their first time being caught. They could either be killed or lead the way. They could only choose the latter. The two of them were husband and wife. If one was caught, the other wouldn't think of running away. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Robber 12 wouldn't leave alone. She also didn't dare to act recklessly. The other end of the string tied to Robber 11's leg was in Xiaofan's hands. She didn't have the confidence to kill Xiaofan before Xiaofan made his move. She could only wait for an opportunity. "We're almost there. I remember it's around here," Robber 11 said as he moved his ankle. If he didn't use a knife to cut them, he wouldn't have been able to break free from those threads. The more he struggled, the tighter they became. Now, his entire leg was numb. If one of his legs was crippled, he wouldn't be able to keep his title as Robber 11. He couldn't accept the fact that he couldn't get into the top 10 and fell to 11th place. Only by squeezing into the top 10 could they learn more secrets and obtain more attractive things. Their status in the tribe would also be greatly improved. He didn't want to risk losing a leg, so he was willing to compromise. He only hoped that Xiaofan would really let him go. Robber 11 recalled the first time he met this kid. Back then, this kid wasn't that strong. Getting rid of him was child's play. How could there be such a huge change in just 2 years? Yes. Xiaofan memorized the surrounding terrain. Next time, if no one led the way, he could come here himself. He could even fill in the gaps on the incomplete map. Yanjiao's patrol team had received the message from Xiaofan and turned back. As for the people from the Feather tribe, Tian Shan tribe and Hui tribe, they lost track of Xiaofan and Robber 11 and Robber 12 after they entered the forest. Xiaofan wasn't interested in knowing where they went, whether they continued to search or returned to Yanjiao. Now, no one was following them. Logically speaking, Robber 11 and Robber 12 should be happy that no one was following them. 2 against 1, they should have the advantage. However, they didn't feel that way. Instead, they became more cautious. Xiaofan dared to follow them alone. Either he was too arrogant and stupid, or he wasn't afraid of them playing tricks on him. For the sake of his leg, Robber 11 decided to be honest. He had to think carefully about his escape plan. This kid didn't seem like someone who would fool around. "It's over there." Robber 11 pointed to Xiaofan. At the same time, he paid attention to Xiaofan's expression to see if Xiaofan had any killing intent towards them. Xiaofan looked over and saw that the area between the two hills was just an ordinary grassland. The ground was overgrown with weeds. Robber 12 noticed Robber 11's gaze. She hesitated for a moment before walking over and taking out a knife. Both of them had a habit of leaving a mark where they hid something that no one else could see. It was a mark that only the two of them could understand. Hence, after Robber 12 went over, he quickly found the right place to stab. She removed the layer of soil on top, revealing a square stone slab that was about a meter long. The stone slab was thick, so Robber 12 had a hard time prying it open. Although they ran fast, they weren't strong enough. Robber 11 wanted to go over and help, but Xiaofan walked over and reached out his hand that wasn't holding the silk thread. He grabbed the thick stone slab and lifted it up along with the layer of soil that was still covering it. Seeing Xiaofan lift the thick slab of stone as easily as peeling off tree bark with one hand, the two of them were impressed by the strength of the Flaming Horn tribesman. "It's down there." Robber 12 and Robber 11 looked at each other. They jumped down first and led the way. The cave below was relatively deep, but it wasn't very long. The storage area was only about 70 to 80 square meters. However, it was very sturdy. It was supported by stone pillars and stone slabs. Otherwise, it wouldn't have lasted for so long. That was why Xiaofan had a clear view of the cave after just a few steps. Robber 12 took out a water moon stone and lit up the cave. She pointed at the three skeletons leaning against the wall. "We found the thing on them." They didn't mention the words, longevity leaf, to Xiaofan. They thought that Xiaofan might not know what it was. He just referred to it as thing and treasure. Now that they thought about it, they regretted it. Why did they bury it in Yanjiao? They should have left it here. If not, they might have been able to squeeze into the top 10 of the robbers list with the longevity leaf. Would those vulgar people in Yanjiao know the true value of the longevity leaf? It was best if they didn't know. If they had the chance, they would sneak into Yanjiao and steal it back. Unfortunately, they couldn't find out Xiaofan's intentions. They also didn't know what Xiaofan was thinking. Xiaofan approached the skeletons. Their clothes were no longer recognizable and there were no distinctive items on them to prove their identity. However, from the hardness of their bones and the degree of preservation, these people must have been powerful warriors. The stronger they were, the better their bones were preserved. Xiaofan still remembered the wooden cylinder that held the longevity leaf. After so many years, the color of the cylinder had changed. However, to be able to preserve it for hundreds or even thousands of years without rotting, it was still a rare high-quality wood. The longevity leaf inside was even better. When he took it out, it was as fresh as new. The longevity leaf recorded the knot divination of the Yi tribe. It was made a long time ago by the people of the Yi tribe. It was similar to what Xiaofan learned from the Yi family in the royal city. For it to appear on this side of the sea, it must have been brought here by the people who came through the sea passage 1,000 years ago. Looking at the posture of the skeletons, Xiaofan asked Robber 11 and Robber 12, "When you came here, did you move them?" The two who were communicating with their eyes were startled by Xiaofan's sudden question. "No. We flipped them up and looked at them, but we restored them later." They were thieves, but they were still respectful towards these corpses that had been preserved for so many years. They wouldn't break the bones and throw them away. Xiaofan looked at the posture of the three skeletons. They were all facing the same direction as if they were looking at something. Following the empty eye sockets, Xiaofan found the answer on a stone pillar. There were many words and patterns engraved on the stone pillars. Some of them might have been left behind by the small unknown tribe that first lived here, and some of them were written in the language of this place. One of the pictures seemed to be mixed with other words and pictures. Those who didn't know wouldn't be able to tell. This was also why Robber 11 and Robber 12 didn't pay attention to it. Different tribes had different styles of pictures. Robber 11 and Robber 12 didn't pay much attention to this small tribe that didn't even make a splash in history. That was why they didn't pay much attention to most of the words and pictures on the pillar. The carvings on the stone pillar looked like some kind of plant. However, Xiaofan was already very surprised when he saw the carvings. This was the Ji family's family tattoo in the royal city on the other side of the sea. It was the Ji tribe's totem tattoo in the early years. Back then, when the passage under the sea rose, a group of people came from the other side of the sea. Other than the Mu and Yi family, there were also people from the Ji family. However, now that the Mu family changed their surname to Wuxia and dominated the desert, the Ji family died here. The people who came here had a lot of internal conflicts. What were the three Ji family members trying to do by stealing things from the Yi family? Unfortunately, 1,000 years had passed and Xiaofan didn't know what they were thinking. Xiaofan looked carefully again but didn't find anything. Other than the Ji family tattoo, there was nothing else on the pillar. The Ji family tattoo seemed to be the last trace left behind by the three of them. Walking out of the cave, Xiaofan didn't reply to Robber 11's probing. He just let them go as promised. Once they were free, Robber 11 and Robber 12 didn't bother to probe Xiaofan anymore. They just wanted to escape. Looking at the two escaping figures, Xiaofan turned around and walked back to the cave. The Ji family had a habit. They would put grains in their graves. Judging from the looks of the three people in the cave, they should be prepared to die. If so, did they follow the customs of their tribe? Looking at the tribal tattoo they left behind, they should still have deep feelings for the Ji family. Xiaofan had already carefully checked the cave below, but he didn't find any grains. Perhaps they had already rotted into dust, or perhaps they were eaten by other underground creatures. However, Xiaofan had a feeling that this wasn't the end. If they followed the customs of the Ji family, they should have placed a container for grains. It didn't have to be pottery, it could have been something else. But in reality, there was nothing. If they knew they were going to die and never return, what would they do if they had grains in their hands? Chapter 524. If it wasn't hidden in the underground cave, could it have been scattered on the ground? With the intention of probing, Xiaofan walked around the cave and found a few plants that looked like grains. However, they didn't look like something the Ji family would leave behind because most of them belonged to the land here. Xiaofan had seen similar plants in various places before. He heard that in the early years, there were tribes that planted them. However, as time went by, people gradually forgot about them due to the discovery of a higher yield type of grain. The reason he could see these grains that were popular thousands of years ago was because a small tribe used to live here. Moreover, the underground cave was left behind by that unknown tribe. The underground cave was used as a granary to store grains, so there would be some scattered on the ground. However, these weren't something the Ji family would care about. Even thousands of years ago, they wouldn't have brought these grains with them. If the Ji family carried them around, they must have thought that they were more precious. After looking around again, Xiaofan still couldn't find anything. Could it be that the three Ji family members really didn't bring any seeds? Or perhaps, the seeds they brought had all rotted into dust? Or could it be that someone had already come here and dug everything away? No, that shouldn't be the case. Robber 11 and Robber 12 had only been here for 2 to 3 years. If someone came here earlier, they would have found the underground cave and the longevity leaf wouldn't have been taken away by Robber 11 and Robber 12. Was he wrong? Xiaofan stood at the entrance of the cave and looked around. There were a lot of weeds and all sorts of unknown plants. There weren't many trees, only a few saplings that weren't growing well and a few scattered shrubs. Hence, the place seemed more spacious. There were indeed fewer trees in this place. The weeds looked lush, but that was only because there were many of them. When they were gathered together, they looked especially lush. However, when they were separated, each one of them didn't look as good. He thought about the environment where the 1,000-grain gold grew. When they grew, they would steal all the nutrients from the surrounding soil. It was extremely overbearing. Although it wasn't as obvious here, there was a similar trend. There must be something here. Xiaoxian scanned his surroundings again, but this time, he didn't look for grain-like plants. Instead, he looked at all the plants that grew on the ground. Then, his gaze stopped on a plant that didn't even reach his knees. Earlier, Xiaoxian had been looking for grains and hadn't noticed these plants. Now that he looked at them again, he felt that they were familiar. Xiaoxian often ran around in the forest, so he would find the plants in the forest familiar. However, this time, it was not the plants he had seen in the forest. After thinking about it carefully, Xiaoxian felt that this was very similar to a plant he had seen in Jiju's field. At that time, Xiaoxian had gone to look for Jiju. Jiju had brought him around the golden grain fields and he had seen many of the plants that were commonly grown there. There were crops for daily consumption and some more special plants. Among them, there was a plant that Jiju called veins of the sky. In the golden grain fields, there was a large plot of land specially set aside to grow it. Usually, there were people guarding it. The slaves were not allowed to go there at all and the stewards had to take care of it personally. However, Jiju didn't say much at that time and left with Xiaoxian. The golden grain fields were famous for their grains. Jiju had mainly introduced Xiaoxian to grains, so they had only walked past the place where veins of the sky were planted. Xiaoxian didn't have a deep impression of it. If he hadn't seen this plant here, he wouldn't have remembered what veins of the sky looked like. The plant not far away looked very similar to the veins of the sky planted in Jiju's field. However, in comparison, the ones planted in Jiju's field had more leaves and grew better. The ones here were very shriveled. If one didn't look closely, they wouldn't be able to associate it with the dense foliage of the plants. This was one of the reasons why Xiaoxian didn't notice it at first. As for the veins of the sky, Xiaoxian had only seen its surface part and had never seen its underground part. The only thing he knew was that the most precious part of the veins of the sky was all underground. Moreover, the veins of the sky looked very similar to the distribution of the meridians in the human body. They were born this way, so they were named veins of the sky. Was it really veins of the sky? Were these brought here by the 3G family members? After discovering one, Xiaoxian looked around. He saw a few more, but they weren't big and didn't grow as well as the ones in the golden grain fields. Xiaoxian stabbed his sword into the ground and took out a dagger. He planned to dig one up first. After taking 2 steps, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. Xiaoxian tilted his head and looked at a bush about 10 meters away from him. He had always thought that it was just an ordinary bush growing here, but now he felt that something was wrong. He turned around and walked towards the shrub. When he got closer, he realized that it wasn't a shrub, but a plant with many branches. The leaves on the branches weren't very big, but when compared to the vein of the heavens, he realized that the leaves on the branches were exactly the same. The only difference was that the stem of the veins of the sky wasn't made of wood. The one Xiaoxian saw in the golden grain fields wasn't made of wood either, but this one was. This veins of the sky could be said to be the best growing plant in this area. Although it was only half the height of a person, it was the largest of all the other veins of the heavens in the area. If the veins of the sky weren't herbs that only grew for a few years but could turn into wood and grow endlessly, then could this biggest veins of the sky have been left behind by the Ji family? But after 1,000 years, this was the only change the veins of the sky had. No matter what, this was still a huge discovery. Xiaoxian was excited. Although he was anxious to see how the biggest veins of the sky grew, he didn't touch it directly. He didn't know what the underground part of the veins of the sky was like. If he wasn't careful, he might accidentally destroy a treasure. So, Xiaoxian walked back, took the dagger, and carefully dug out the small one he had found earlier. Bit by bit, the soil was removed. This plant that didn't even reach Xiaoxian's knee revealed its roots. There were many roots. If not for the different stems and leaves, Xiaoxian would have thought he was digging up ginseng. However, this root was even finer and more numerous than ginseng. Xiaoxian was even more careful, trying his best to dig out this veins of the sky. The more he dug, the more shocked he became. When he saw the complete veins of the sky, Xiaoxian felt a chill run down his spine. It was too similar. It was too similar. When Xiaoxian first heard about the veins of the sky from Jiju, he only knew that the most useful underground part of the veins of the sky looked very similar to a human's meridians. Now that he saw it for himself, he knew how similar it was. The roots he dug out were no more than the length of a palm. Each of the thin roots seemed to correspond to a meridian in the human body. Which part was thick, which part was thin, which part was long, which part was short, which part was forked. More than 90% of them corresponded. The veins of the sky lived up to its name. Xiaoxian didn't know what the veins of the sky were used for. Jiju didn't mention it at the time, only telling Xiaoxian that it was a plant used for medicinal purposes. However, looking at it, it should be related to meridians, right? After digging out one, Xiaoxian looked around again. Now that he was looking for the veins of the sky instead of staring at the grains, he realized that there were quite a few veins of the sky growing in this area. Xiaoxian just looked around 50 meters and saw more than 20. However, those were not big and didn't grow very well. Perhaps the biggest one had stolen all the nutrients. Xiaoxian planned to dig these up and bring them back to take a look. It would be even better if they could be transplanted. Since Jiju was willing to open up such a large piece of land in the field just to plant the veins of the sky, and even guarded it with so many soldiers, it must be something extraordinary. After chasing Robber 11 and Robber 12 for so long and spending so much time running here, Xiaoxian didn't plan to return to the tribe tonight. He decided to stay here and guard it first. He went to the forest to hunt a wild boar and found some fruits for dinner. During the hunt, Xiaoxian saw a flying squirrel being hunted. This kind of thing happened all the time in the forest and could be seen everywhere. If it was in the past, Xiaoxian wouldn't even look at it. However, today, Xiaoxian stepped in and saved the injured flying squirrel that was about to be swallowed. It wasn't that Xiaoxian suddenly decided to be kind. He thought of the veins of the sky and wanted to use this flying squirrel to test its use. The flying squirrel that was tied up by Xiaoxian screamed in fear and struggled with all its might. However, it couldn't break free from the rope no matter how hard it tried. He waited for Xiaoxian to finish off the wild boar and fill his stomach before bringing the flying squirrel over. He didn't bring it too close. This little thing's claws were sharp and it could bite. Xiaoxian held the flying squirrel in one hand and the veins of the sky that he dug up today with the other hand. He moved the roots towards the flying squirrel. When the roots of veins of the sky reached the flying squirrel tried to avoid them. Xiaoxian continued moving the roots of veins of the sky closer to the flying squirrel's mouth. The flying squirrel was forced into a corner and bit down. Then, it froze. However, it only froze for a second. Soon, the flying squirrel crazily gnawed at the roots of veins of the sky. It was as fast as a chef cutting vegetables. Only a series of crunching sounds could be heard. The roots of veins of the sky that were close to the flying squirrel's mouth quickly disappeared. When Xiaoxian pulled back the veins of the sky, the flying squirrel was still struggling. It looked reluctant and stretched its neck out, wanting to continue gnawing. Xiaoxian didn't give it any more veins of the sky. He quietly observed the flying squirrel's changes. Many animals had a natural instinct and intuition to find herbs. They knew what was good for them and when to eat it. Since it was so eager, veins of the sky must be very useful. Chapter 525. Before the root of vein of the sky was broken, its smell was similar to that of ordinary tree roots. Xiaoxian did not smell anything special. Even this flying squirrel, when Xiaoxian extended vein of the sky to it, was very reluctant at first. It only thought that vein of the sky was a threat from Xiaoxian, a stranger. However, when this flying squirrel bit off one of vein of the sky's thin roots, a light bitter smell wafted out. Xiaoxian had never tasted it before, so he did not dare to eat it carelessly. Eating carelessly in the forest could lead to death. Even totemic warriors with relatively strong stomachs could not avoid this. Not long ago, someone saw a plant in the forest that looked very similar to the vegetables they grew. After eating a little, he ended up having diarrhea for 2 days. Therefore, Xiaoxian could only use this flying squirrel as a test subject. After Xiaoxian took back vein of the sky, this flying squirrel struggled fiercely at first, wanting nothing more than to follow the vein of the sky. But soon, its struggling slowed down. Finally, as if it had fallen asleep, it did not move at all. Only the slight rise and fall of its body proved that it was still alive. However, the wounds on the flying squirrel's body were bloody and deep. The wounds on its back and other parts of its body had stopped bleeding long ago. Not only that, the blood had coagulated and was forming scabs. On its leg, where a piece of flesh had been torn off, it was also changing. If this flying squirrel's injuries were left untreated, it might not survive the night. It had lost too much blood, and there were many bite wounds. It could not even walk. The longer it was delayed, the worse its injuries would worsen. But now, it was recovering. There were still some sparks in the fire. After eating the wild boar, Xiaoxian did not add any more firewood. Now, in order to see the flying squirrel's changes more clearly, Xiaoxian held up the water moonstone to light up the fire. Wild beasts approached, their green eyes flashing in the forest. However, Xiaoxian's aura was very strong. They felt that he was not easy to deal with, so they lingered for a while before leaving unwillingly. Xiaoxian had been observing the changes on the flying squirrel's body. He did not have time to care about the wild beasts, so he did not hide his aura. He released his aura to intimidate the wild beasts that wanted to approach, saving him a lot of trouble. Xiaoxian sat on the ground and tied the flying squirrel's rope to a tree branch. He did not sleep for the entire night, so he kept an eye on the flying squirrel. Early in the morning, the flying squirrel, who had been tied to the tree, moved and woke up from his deep sleep. When he woke up, he probably remembered that he was tied up. Fei Shu's movements became more violent, especially when he saw Xiaoxian. He screamed in protest. Although Xiaoxian had given it the vein of the sky and saved its life, it would not let down its guard against Xiaoxian just because of this. Wild animals were very cautious. If it let go, it would bite Xiaoxian again. Xiaoxian looked at the scabs on its body. As the flying squirrel struggled, the scabs fell off, revealing a patch of soft, hairless skin. The most serious injury was its leg. Although it was still sunken, it was much better than the bone-deep injury he saw yesterday. Perhaps it would recover soon. Looking at the strength of its struggle, it was clear that the flying squirrel was very energetic. There was no trace of death in it. After staying up all night, Xiaoxian did not feel tired at all. Instead, he was very excited. Originally, he wanted to follow the 2 thieves here to find out about the longevity leaf's origin. He did not expect to find something like this. The Ji family did not carry ordinary things with them. The vein of the sky was indeed a very powerful herb. No wonder Ji Ju was willing to give up such a large plot of land to plant it. After feeding the flying squirrel a little of the vein of the sky that he had dug out, Xiaoxian wrapped the rest in soil and leaves to prevent the smell of the vein of the sky from spreading. An unbitten vein of the sky would not attract the attention of other animals. However, once the smell of the roots leaked out, Xiaofan could not be sure if it would attract other animals. Looking at the spirited flying squirrel, then at the huge vein of the sky, Xiaofan's eyes burned with passion. This trip was worth it. Xiaofan circled around this area and expanded his search. He estimated that there were no less than 50 vein of the sky. This number was naturally not as many as the ones in Jiju's field. However, Xiaofan was already very satisfied. With these vein of the sky, he might even be able to obtain the seeds of the vein of the sky. Xiaofan had another guess. After so many years, only 50 vein of the sky survived. Perhaps the main reason was because of the largest vein of the sky. Just like the 1,000-grain gold, in the competition for nutrients, only those who won would survive. Those who lost would become nutrients for other plants. Thousands of years had passed. Countless seeds fell on the ground and countless plants sprouted. However, only a few survived. These were the final winners. Perhaps, if the land continued to become barren, some of them would not be able to survive. However, Xiaofan had found them. If possible, Xiaofan hoped to transplant all of these back to the tribe. If they were given enough nutrients and space, would these vein of the sky break free from their slow growth and start a new cycle of growth? These were the legacies left behind by the 3G family members who died here. Thousands of years had passed and no one had been able to obtain their legacies. Not even the longevity leaf was counted. The longevity leaf that recorded the art of not divination belonged to the E family. However, the legacies that truly belonged to the G family were these vein of the sky that had been quietly growing here. Xiaofan took a deep breath and calmed himself down. He did not know why the 3G family members would bring the E family's things here. He also did not know what kind of people the 3G family members were. However, Xiaofan had to thank them for their legacies. Looking around, Xiaofan walked further away, and then climbed up the hill over there. In this area, only the top of the hill was the highest point. Xiaofan wanted to take a good look at this area from above. He wanted to see if there was anything else he had overlooked. Looking down from the top of the hill, he had a panoramic view of the area above the cave. Under the domineering vein of the sky, there were not many other plants that could grow well. Even if they could, their growth would be sluggish. Xiaofan could see all of these plants clearly from his vantage point. His gaze swept across the ground below, away from the area around the cave, and into the distance. There, the grass was denser. In the calm, all sorts of plants fought for nutrients, silently killing each other without anyone noticing. Over there, it was an ordinary mountainous area. There was no strong or weak distribution like the vein of the sky. Xiaofan decided to stop here and head down the hill to dig up the vein of the sky. Suddenly, he saw a familiar figure. That was, Xiaofan looked over, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. Cabbage? Chapter 526. Xiaofan couldn't believe his eyes when he suddenly saw this familiar figure. He stared at it carefully for a while to make sure he wasn't mistaken. Then, he hurried down the hill and walked in that direction. He hadn't paid much attention to it when he was walking in the forest. He even walked back and forth a few times, but he didn't pay attention to the figure that looked like a cabbage. It was because it was too big. There were all kinds of strange plants in the forest. Xiaofan didn't know how many plants that looked like leaves he had seen, so he didn't pay much attention to it when he walked past. But standing on the hill and looking down, Xiaofan couldn't calm down when he saw the figure clearly. The leaves were quite similar, but its appearance was too similar to a cabbage. It was just that this cabbage was taller than Xiaofan himself. Xiaofan came to the plant that looked like a cabbage and took a closer look. He could hear the sound of something shattering in his ears. Turning his head to look, Xiaoxian saw a bug as thick as an arm lying on a wide leaf outside the cabbage. It was gnawing a hole in the leaf. Probably sensing Xiaoxian's arrival, the unfamiliar aura gave it a sense of crisis. It stopped gnawing on the leaf and raised the front half of its body to face Xiaoxian. If Xiaoxian hadn't been prepared and knew that this was just a bug gnawing on a leaf, he might have mistaken it for a snake when he saw such a scene. The spots and patterns on the front of the bug looked like a green poisonous snake in the forest. Even the fine lines on the scales were very clear, especially the two lines that looked like eyes. It was very scary. Suddenly, it looked like a snake was staring at him. This was also one of the bug's life-saving methods. However, Xiaoxian had seen many similar bugs, so he wasn't scared by it. He even stood to the side and observed it with interest for a while. Perhaps it felt that Xiaoxian was no longer in danger, so the bug crawled back and continued to gnaw on the leaf. Some bugs in the forest would take years or even longer to transform into butterflies or moths. This bug was probably not far from transforming. Xiaoxian moved his gaze away from the bug and continued to look at the cabbage in front of him. He raised his hand and cut off a piece of the leaf with a dagger. He sniffed it and found it to be okay. There wasn't any strange smell, but Xiaoxian didn't eat it. He might not be able to eat something that the bug could eat. He took the leaf and walked over to the flying squirrel that was hanging on the tree. Unfortunately, the flying squirrel didn't show any interest in the leaf. It only bit when it was irritated, it didn't eat it and spat it out. After a few tries, Xiaoxian watched as the flying squirrel bit the leaf angrily. Nothing happened and Xiaoxian was overjoyed. He stopped tormenting the flying squirrel. He walked around the surrounding forest. Because of the vein of the sky, the other plants didn't grow well near the hole. Xiaoxian didn't see any plants that looked like cabbages, so he had to look further away. Just like the one he had just found, it was found a little further away from the cave. It was quite a strong plant to be able to squeeze out a place to grow in the forest. Xiaoxian hadn't paid attention to it before because he hadn't paid attention to plants that were taller. Now that he followed the leaf, it didn't take long for him to find about 30 of them. And this was only the one in the vicinity. There were even more small plants on the ground that hadn't grown yet. Some of them had obvious traces of being trampled by forest animals, while others had been bitten and had incomplete leaves. There were too many seedlings like this, so Xiaoxian did not count them. If they were left alone, they would not survive. They would either be trampled to death by the animals in the forest, or starve to death by other plants. After looking around, Xiaoxian returned to the hole. Last night, he had been watching the flying squirrel and the effects of the vein of the sky. He hadn't slept at all. Today, he had been running around since early morning. He was a little tired, so he sat down on the grass to rest. He ate the leftover meat from yesterday to relieve his hunger. Xiaoxian thought about the origin of these cabbages. Did they really grow here naturally? There were also people who grew vegetables here. The leaves were about 60% similar to cabbages, but the leaves were much longer and narrower. Moreover, the vegetables that were commonly grown here had fat roots. The people in the tribe mainly ate the roots, and the leaves were just a side dish. The vegetables that were commonly grown in the fields here were large, but most of them were only as tall as Xiaoxian's waist. If they were too small, the people in the tribe wouldn't be willing to grow them. But compared to the cabbages here, they were nothing. Mutated? Xiaoxian suddenly thought of the vegetables that were grown on the other side of the sea. There were also crops similar to cabbages over there. Xiaoxian had seen them in the fields of Jeju. However, although the leaves of the vegetables over there were wide, they grew too scattered and were very short. They only reached Xiaoxian's knees. Many tribes on the other side of the sea didn't grow that. They felt that the yield was too low and it wasn't enough to fill their hunger. But the slave owners liked it. Only the slave masters in King's City who liked these vegetables would set aside a large amount of land in their own fields to grow these vegetables in order to eat them. So, on the other side of the sea, only the slave owners had the seeds of these vegetables. The cabbages around here weren't the type that the people here often grew. They were also different from the ones grown in the fields of the slave owners on the other side of the sea. Of course, there were many similarities. But so far, after going to so many places, even the mountains and forests, Xiaofan had never seen such cabbages. After thinking for a while, Xiaofan's eyes suddenly widened. He thought of a possibility. This used to be the territory of an unknown small tribe. They also knew how to grow crops. The surrounding terrain was relatively flat, and they might have grown the vegetables that were commonly grown by the tribes on the mainland. So, even if the small tribe migrated, there would more or less be some vegetables left behind. What if the Ji family didn't just plant the seeds of the sky here, but also the seeds of some other vegetables? What if the 3 Ji family members in the cave scattered a handful of vegetable seeds around here before they died? There were 2 similar yet different vegetables growing here. Would they give birth to a descendant that had the strengths of both? Perhaps Xiaofan was overthinking it. But, what if it was true? If it was true, Xiaofan could only say that it was the will of the heavens. If it was artificially grown, who knew how long it would take to get a satisfactory vegetable? Even the vegetables that were grown in many tribes today had to be filtered generation after generation. Here, different varieties of vegetables from the 2 continents grew together and obtained offspring that fused the characteristics of both sides. Then, after a long period of natural combination and selection, the offspring that survived today, that fused the advantages of both sides, and that had the strongest adaptability and the most stable inheritance, the cabbage. Not only were these Chinese cabbages large in size, they were also in the shape of a ball. Unlike the leaves on the other side of the sea, these Chinese cabbages here, other than the large leaves on the outside, had a tendency to wrap around the core, forming an upright oval ball. Regardless of whether it was the result of crossbreeding or the mutation of the vegetables planted here, Xiaofan was very satisfied just by looking at the shape. Now, the only question was, could it be eaten? No matter what, he had to chop one first. Xiaofan chose the first one he saw and chopped the big vegetable ball in the middle with his sword. The few leaves on the outside looked too old and were not easy to carry, so he only chopped the ball into an oval shape. The vegetable ball was taller than him and heavier, which made Xiaofan even more satisfied. The fact that it was heavier meant that there were more leaves forming the vegetable ball, unlike the other leaves. If it was edible, the yield would be higher. Carrying the vegetable ball on his shoulder, Xiaofan went to the cave. He thought of something and turned around to look at the flying squirrel hanging on the tree. There was only a broken straw rope left. It must have run away when he was looking for the Chinese cabbages. To be able to bite the rope, it must have had a lot of strength. It must have used up a lot of energy to struggle. It seemed that the flying squirrel's injuries were almost healed. The veins of the sky around it had no signs of being bitten, which meant that the flying squirrel did not notice the veins of the sky growing here. The veins of the sky that were not cut open were not much different from normal tree roots. It was indeed hard to notice. Robber 11 and Robber 12 had stolen many treasures over the years, but they never thought that there was such a precious thing growing here. Perhaps, they had never thought about plants at all. After all, who would just throw a treasure on the ground? After cleaning up the surrounding traces, Xiaofan wrapped the veins of the sky and put it in his animal skin bag. He then pulled some big leaves and straw rope to wrap the vegetable ball and left. Xiaofan did not plan to do anything here for the time being. He was alone now, so it was impossible for him to take everything away. Especially the biggest veins of the sky, which required more careful excavation and protection. He also wanted to try transplanting the veins of the sky back to the tribe, so he needed more help. The other veins of the sky here and the Chinese cabbages were all treasures. Xiaoxian planned to get people to dig them all up when he returned to the tribe. After everything was settled, Xiaoxian carried the vegetable ball and left. He chased after the robbers for a whole night and did not return. The tribe's warriors patrolling the border paid attention to any movements in the distance. When they saw Xiaoxian's figure, the patrolling warriors did not recognize him because he was too far away. Plus, Xiaoxian was carrying a big vegetable ball, which was very strange. When they got closer and saw that it was Xiaoxian, the patrolling warriors happily went to welcome him. They did not know what Xiaoxian was carrying, but since the great elder carried it back personally, it must be something extraordinary. Not only the patrolling warriors, but the others were also curious when they saw Xiaoxian carrying an unknown object back. It was very big, so it was hard to ignore. Xiaoxian did not explain much to them. He just carried the vegetable ball and rushed into the forest towards the tribe. His footsteps were hurried, and he disappeared in a flash. Chapter 527. As soon as Xiaoxian rushed into the tribe, he called for the shamanis, chief and team leaders. Not long after, the two shamanesses rushed into the house. The two chiefs and 3 team leaders also rushed over. According to the messenger, Xiaoxian came back in a hurry for something. He didn't say why Xiaoxian wanted to see them, but they heard that it was urgent. If it was just a small matter, Xiaoxian wouldn't have summoned them in such a hurry. So, they all put down what they were doing and rushed over. They knew that Xiaoxian went to chase after the bandits, so they were relieved to see him come back safely. But why was he in such a hurry? As soon as they stepped through the door, the first thing they saw was a big bag placed there. "What's this?" asked the shamaness. Xiaoxian untied the rope and big leaves that wrapped the vegetable ball, revealing the green vegetable ball inside. This house was where the tribe usually held meetings and discussed important matters. The door of the stone house had been widened, so Xiaoxian didn't feel crowded when he carried the vegetable ball in. On the way, Xiaoxian also tried his best not to let the vegetable ball hit the branches, so until now, the vegetable ball was still in good condition. "I found something, I think it might be useful," said Xiaoxian. As he spoke, someone came in. It was Guang Yi. When Xiaoxian returned to the tribe, he saw Guang Yi outside the fearsome beast forest. He was patrolling the newly opened fields, so he asked him to bring 2 birds over. The birds that Guang Yi brought in were the dumb birds that the Lu tribe had just shipped over. Dumb birds were the large birds raised by the Lu tribe. Xiaoxian had seen them before. Because their upper limbs had deteriorated, they couldn't fly. Their bodies were fat, and their legs were thick and fleshy, so they were raised by the Lu tribe as food. Perhaps because they were tamed by the Lu tribe, these birds lost their original wildness. They were much dumber than the beasts in the forest, so they were called dumb birds. Yanjiao had expanded and created many fields and animal pens on Wanshi's land. The animal pens were naturally for breeding. They had already bought some baby beasts from the Lu tribe. The first batch of dumb bird chicks had arrived. They were much bigger than adult ducks. After all, their eggs were big, so the birds that hatched would naturally be bigger than other birds. Xiaoxian asked Guang Yi to bring in the chicks and an adult dumb bird. The chicks were small, so they were brought into the stone house. The adult dumb bird was placed on the wooden cart. "Why did you bring dumb birds here?" asked Ao. "Let's see if they're edible." As he spoke, he tore off 2 leaves from the vegetable ball and handed them to the baby dumb bird. The other leaf was placed next to the adult dumb bird's mouth. Although they had already tried it with the flying squirrel, they had to be careful. What if something happened to the people in the tribe who ate it? Xiaoxian had planned to feed the birds if they didn't eat the leaves. Unexpectedly, both the chicks and the adult dumb birds were happily pecking at the leaves. Even though they were tied to the wooden cart, the dumb birds were energized when they saw food. They pecked at the leaves very quickly. In comparison, the chicks were much slower. Seeing Xiaoxian's actions, the people in the house understood what Xiaoxian meant. They looked at the dumb birds who were happily munching on the leaves and their faces lit up. "This is edible," said Zheng Luo excitedly. Every time they found an edible food, they felt a sense of accomplishment. It was one thing for them to eat ferocious beasts. After so many years, they had gained experience in dealing with them. However, plant-based food was their weakness. Being able to eat meant that they could try to grow food. Even if they, the totem warriors, didn't usually eat food, they could feed it to the women and children in the tribe. In addition to meat, they would also eat some fruits and other grains. The seeds they brought back from the other side of the sea hadn't borne fruit yet. Now, they only ate a few kinds of food. If there was one more kind of food that could be widely grown, they would be happy, even if it wasn't enough to satisfy their hunger. They didn't lack food. With the fearsome beast forest behind them, they could hunt. There were also large fields and animal pens outside. They had enough food. They could afford to try planting. Being able to plant new crops was also a proof of their tribe's ability. They would be proud of themselves. Just like this time, when the big tribes came, they learned to be smart. They didn't bring gold, but instead brought their own specialties. Some were more expensive, some were more ordinary. Among the ordinary gifts, there were a few that the Yanjiao people had never seen before. They were all grown within the tribes. In the past, when they lacked food, they didn't care. But now it was different. They felt that a tribe that could grow all kinds of food was more impressive. Duo Kong looked at the big ball of vegetables Xiao Xian brought back and smiled meaningfully. He could use it to show off. When he went to other tribes in the future, he would give them a big ball of vegetables. Yanjiao's specialty? That sounded good. Who said Yanjiao couldn't grow good things? How could a normal person grow such a big ball of vegetables? Everyone in the stone house stared at the vegetable ball with a deep look in their eyes. However, Xiaoxian did not know what they were thinking. He was watching the two dumb birds for their reactions. 10 minutes passed. The dumb bird chick pooped in the stone house. It was a little tired, but it was still in good spirits. As for the one outside, it was even more energetic. It was clamoring to eat more. Seeing that there were no problems, Duo Kong rolled up his sleeves. "Why don't I try it first?" "Wait, there's no rush." Xiao Xian stopped Duo Kong from pulling the leaves. "How can there be no rush? If it's really edible, we should quickly dig some back and plant it. What if the other tribes get it first?" Duo Kong still wanted to use it to show off. "That's not the most important thing." As he spoke, Xiao Xian took out the vein of the sky wrapped in leaves from the animal skin bag. When he wrapped it, he put soil inside. After removing the soil, he carefully brushed it clean with a brush. Xiao Xian held up the vein of the sky, which was missing a small part of its roots, for everyone to see. It feels. Gigu couldn't explain it. He just felt that it was familiar. Ta looked at the vein of the sky's roots and felt a chill. "I think I've seen it before, but I've never seen it before." Ta's words were contradictory, but everyone knew that when he said he had seen it before, he meant that he felt it was familiar. But they had never seen this plant before. Xiao Xian understood everyone's feelings. Although many people in the tribe would observe the body structure of their prey after hunting so that they could give it a fatal blow the next time they hunted, they had never done this for humans. They knew the general distribution of the meridians because when they used their totemic power, they would have a hazy feeling. Following the direction of their totemic power, they could see the meridians in their body. That was why Guei, Ta, and the others had said that he looked familiar. "It looks similar to the meridians in our body. Because it grows like this, it's also called the vein of the sky. Xiaoxian said. Vein of the sky? Zheng Luo and the old shaman shouted at the same time. When they were on the other side of the sea, they had heard about the vein of the sky, but they had never seen it before. It was said that only the people in the royal city had it. It had been many years since they last heard about the veins of the sky from the Taiha tribe. Vein of the sky? The rumored vein of the sky that can reconnect broken meridians? The old shaman's voice trembled with excitement. Duo Kong and Zheng Luo's faces were red with excitement. That's what the vein of the sky looks like. Xiaoxian, where did you find it? In the room, 8 pairs of eyes stared at Xiaoxian. Xiaoxian briefly told them about his discovery of the vein of the sky and the cabbage. When they heard Xiaoxian say there might be a 1,000-year-old vein of the sky there, even the usually calm shaman and chief breathed heavily. Dig it up. The 2 shamans shouted at the same time. The leaders and leaders were also rubbing their fists and palms. They couldn't wait to tear down that piece of land and carry it all back. As for the cabbage, Xiaoxian said. Dig it up too. Dig it up, dig it up, dig it all up. Even an idiot knew the value of the vein of the sky. Yanjiao would never give it up. The Chinese cabbage Xiaoxian was talking about had an unknown origin. Regardless of whether the Ji family was involved, it could be eaten, it could grow big, it might even grow fast. Most importantly, it was easy to survive. What were the Yanjiao farmers afraid of? It wasn't a bad harvest. No matter how bad it was, there was still something to be gained. Their large-scale planting had just started not too long ago. Everything was still in the trial and error stage. It was impossible for them to compete with other tribes who were good at planting. There had to be a process of practice. If they could succeed, perhaps it would be a big breakthrough for the Flaming Horn tribe. It would also give everyone enough confidence. In the ancestral records, the glorious Flaming Horn tribe was not only strong in terms of fighting, but also in terms of farming, breeding, and handicrafts. The current Flaming Horn tribe had just woken up from a deep slumber. If they wanted to regain their former status, they still needed to work hard from all sides. The cabbage was a piece of juicy meat to them. They wouldn't give it up either. They discussed in the house for a while, then looked at the 2 dumb birds. The young one was looking around curiously while the one outside was dozing off out of boredom. It was not poisonous and could be eaten. This solidified everyone's resolve. There wasn't much time for them to do more experiments. They were worried that someone else would find out about the land. They wanted to do more experiments and move everything back first. Thus, not long after Xiaoxian rushed back, he left with a large group of people. One of them was the chief, 2 of the leaders, and many of the smaller leaders. The tribe didn't want to keep it a secret either. Perhaps other tribes would secretly follow them, but the land belonged to Yanjiao. Who would want to steal it? They didn't say much, just do it. Chapter 528. This time, Zheng Luo, Duo Kong and Gigu went out with Xiaoxian. Generally speaking, the people on the other side of the sea had more experience in planting and digging. After all, their former neighbors were the Taiha tribe who were good at planting. The 2 shamans felt more at ease leaving it to them. As for why Gigu could continue to follow them instead of Ta, that was because of his white falcon. When Cha-Cha was absent, he could only rely on it for aerial warning. Although Yanjiao knew they couldn't hide it from everyone this time, it was necessary to take precautions. Ta was very depressed about this. When his brothers from the other side of the sea came, it wasn't his turn to go out. This time, it wasn't his turn either. Hence, the people from the other tribes who were chatting with each other in Yanjiao saw Ta's long face when they went out. Xiaoxian led the people to the cave where they found the vein of the sky. They looked around carefully. No one else had been here and there were no signs of gnawing on the plants. They sighed in relief. It's here. Xiaofan pointed out the vein of the sky to the others. Seeing the living vein of the sky, everyone was very excited. Thinking about how it would all belong to their tribe, they were even more excited. Is that the cabbage Xiaofan mentioned? Zheng Luo looked at a cabbage in the forest. Xiaofan had only brought back a ball of cabbage, but here was a whole one. If Xiaofan hadn't pointed it out, Zheng Luo wouldn't have guessed it. Yes, that's it. I only cut the ball in the middle. Seeing such a big cabbage, Zheng Luo nodded in satisfaction. Without further delay, he divided the teams. Who was responsible for guarding, who was responsible for digging the cabbage, and who was responsible for digging the vein of the sky? Knowing that this place was full of treasures, the group of rough flaming horn tribesmen were particularly cautious. They took small steps forward. Before they came, the shamans and chiefs had already told them what to do. Because they knew how precious these things were, they were very careful. They were overly careful, afraid that they would accidentally step on a plant and kill it. They had to be gentle when dealing with these precious plants, unlike how they usually hunted. It was difficult for Yanjiao people to say the word gentle. Considering that some people were not good at recognizing plants, and the vein of the sky was a plant that was highly valued by the tribe, Xiaofan circled each vein of the sky so that it would be easier for others to dig. When Zheng Luo gave the order to dig, the soldiers who usually swung stone sticks thicker than a man to smash the beasts now held palm-sized shovels and carefully dug. After digging for a while, he turned his head and asked Xiaofan, "First Elder, is this the right way for me to dig?" He dug again and asked Zheng Luo, "Chief, should we continue digging?" "Dig! Dig! Hurry up! Stop dilly-dallying, when are you going to finish digging like this?" Zheng Luo couldn't stand it anymore. He took out a small shovel and crouched down to dig at a small vein of the sky in front of him. His movements were bold and forceful. However, the moment the shovel touched the ground, it was as if he had stepped on the brakes. He only dug a fingernail deep. Xiaofan couldn't stand watching these people who didn't even sweat when killing fearsome beasts start sweating after digging a few shovels. This was the first time these people were doing something like this. They were under too much psychological pressure and were very nervous. After this, it might be better if they encountered similar situations in the future. Xiaofan was in charge of the biggest vein of the sky. Zheng Luo came over after digging a few shovels. As the chief, Zheng Luo had to participate personally. However, no matter if it was Zheng Luo, Duo Kong and the rest, even Gue He, who had always been calm, were all nervous when they started digging. When Xiaofan's shovel went down, they all trembled. They were worried that Xiaofan would damage the vein of the sky, but they also knew that it wasn't a good idea to be so nervous. In the end, they could only follow Xiaofan and dig. Their goal was to bring the tree back and transplant it. They just had to ensure that the roots were intact. There was no need to dig up all the soil, so Xiaofan and the others basically started digging from the outer parts. After removing the soil, Xiaofan continued digging along the roots of the vein of the sky. Sometimes he used a shovel, sometimes he used a brush. In order to bring the vein of the sky back, they dug like they were treating an antique. In fact, although the roots of the vein of the sky looked thin, they were still very resilient and were not that fragile. Especially this vein of the sky that seemed to have been growing for thousands of years, its roots were harder than the other small veins of the sky. When Duo Kong was digging, he accidentally shoveled too hard. When he looked over nervously, he realized that there was only a shallow shovel mark on the vein of the sky's roots. The skin was not broken. As long as they were careful, it wouldn't be a big deal. There was no need to be too nervous. This calmed them down a little. Later on, they were no longer restrained and dug more efficiently. The white falcon in the sky screeched from time to time. It was just a warning. If anyone ignored the warning and barged in, the Yanjiao people would have to take action. Caesar was brought out by Xiaofan and defended with the other warriors in the forest. A wolf's nose was more sensitive than a human's and could detect places that the warriors overlooked. When the sun was about to set, the largest vein of the sky had been dug out. Its roots were too long, and the area it covered was much larger than the parts on the ground. It looked like it was made up of the meridians of a 10-meter-tall giant. After digging it out, Xiaofan wrapped a large piece of linen cloth in the soil and wrapped the roots of the vein of the sky. They couldn't stay here for too long. They were carrying treasures and they couldn't hide their movements from others. If they stayed here for a night, who knew what would happen? The safest thing was to return to the tribe as soon as possible. "Are you done with the rest?" asked Xiaofan. "Almost. We've dug out all the veins of the sky we can see, no matter the size. We still haven't dug out the small cabbages you mentioned," said Zhengluo. "Forget about that. Wrap up the ones we dug out and bring them back. We'll dig up the rest later. You guys tidy up first. I'm going down into the cave." Xiaofan lifted the stone slab at the entrance of the cave with a jar and jumped in. Inside the cave, the 3 skeletons were still lying there in their original positions. Perhaps they had been in this position for nearly 1,000 years. Xiaofan had already prepared a small clay pot and placed it beside the 3 skeletons. There were some grains in the pot. According to the tribe's rules, whoever found it kept it. Whoever stole it kept it. That was why it wasn't a big deal to dig up everything here. Xiaofan didn't think much of it. Moreover, most of the Ji family in Royal City still had a grudge against Yanjiao. The people of Royal City had hunted them down on the other side of the sea. Although he didn't know the identities of these 3 people or what had happened in the past, Xiaofan still decided to come. It had nothing to do with the Ji family in Royal City or anything else. When Xiaofan was with Ji Ju once said that if Xiaofan encountered a similar situation one day, he hoped that he could place a jar of grains beside the people who couldn't go home. He didn't ask for much, just a jar of grains. Compared to the other Ji family members in Royal City, Ji Ju treated Yanjiao well and helped Xiaofan a lot. The seeds and planting techniques in Yanjiao were all taught by Ji Ju. Xiaofan was willing to do what Ji Ju said. Coming out of the hole and looking at the sky, Xiaofan, Zhengluo, and the others carried the things they dug up and headed back to the tribe. They wanted to get back before the sky turned completely dark. It was already late and many things couldn't be seen clearly. The people who secretly followed the Yanjiao team in the distance could only see the Yanjiao warriors carrying things. Some people went to the hole after Yanjiao left but couldn't see anything on the ground. There were traces of digging everywhere but they couldn't see anything important. Before the Yanjiao team left, they turned the place over again to erase the important traces. These people could only guess that the Yanjiao people had dug up something here but couldn't know what it was. In fact, the Yanjiao people didn't keep everything a secret. There were rumors about the cabbage, so some people in the tribe knew that Xiaofan had found a new kind of food outside and brought people to dig for it. As for the veins of the sky, even the people in the tribe didn't know about it. The next day, the people from the other tribes in Yanjiao stayed up all night with doubts. When they woke up in the morning, they heard that Yanjiao had made a big move and hurried over to take a look. A part of the newly reclaimed land had been blocked off with a tall wooden fence, leaving no gaps. There were also many soldiers standing guard outside, preventing others from approaching. The Tian Shan people couldn't help but be curious. They wanted to ride their eagles up to take a look but were forced back down by the patrolling team's arrows. The patrolling team's attitude was firm. "You have to listen to me in my territory. You can't be so impudent. You're pissed. If you're pissed, you can leave. What are you still doing here? Friendly exchange? What kind of friendly exchange is this? The next time they see you, they won't just force you down. They'll shoot you down. It was rare for the Tian Shan tribesmen to not start a fight. They were too curious. What did the flaming horns bring? Why are they guarding it so tightly? The others also advised them to be patient. They had to figure out Yanjiao's situation first. However, when they finally figured out what the flaming horns were growing, their interest was gone. A new kind of food? Among these tribes, which one of them had less food? Only the Tian Shan and Hui tribes on the grasslands didn't plant much, so they weren't interested. A new type of food was indeed not very attractive to these tribes. Why were they guarding it so tightly for such a small thing? Yanjiao was so stingy. Ignorant. At the same time, in the forest, the veins of the sky had been planted in the tribe's fields. After a few days of adaptation, the veins of the sky in the ground began to show signs of life. Especially the small veins of the sky. Before, they were suppressed and their growth was slow. Now that the land was bigger, there were fewer competitors for nutrients. They were ready for a new round of growth. Looking at the veins of the sky in the ground, the two shamans smiled. The cabbages outside attracted most of the people's attention. These veins of the sky were very low-key. We have to send more people here. Definitely. We can't relax on the cabbage fields outside. Got it. As the shamans and chiefs spoke, Xiaofan suddenly looked in a direction. What's wrong, Xiaofan? Asked Zheng Luo. There's been a lot of thieves lately. Chapter 529. Hearing Xiaofan's words, everyone's expression changed. Someone else is here? Ao asked. Yeah. Xiaofan nodded. But he ran away again. After some thought, Xiaofan said, it doesn't seem to be the same person from last time. Xiaofan was referring to the aura he sensed in the Wanderer area not long ago. The aura he sensed now was similar to the one he sensed before, but it was different. Even the two leaders, Zheng Luo and Ao, couldn't sense it, but they didn't doubt Xiaofan's judgment. Last time you asked the patrol team to bring him back, I did it myself. I think there's more than one person hiding in the dark, Ao said. Last time, when Xiaofan chased after Robber 11 and Robber 12, the patrol team followed them. After that, Xiaofan captured Robber 11 and restricted Robber 12's movements. The patrol team returned first. However, he also asked the patrol team to pass a message to Zheng Luo and Ao. After Xiaofan released Robber 11 and Robber 12, he smeared something on their bodies. When the Yanjiao hunting team hunted, they would look for special prey. For example, they needed a part of the prey's body to be used as medicine, or they needed a horn that was suitable for polishing weapons. If the prey was good at escaping, the Yanjiao people would sprinkle some tracking powder on the prey when they first encountered them. Most of the powder had a strong smell, just like the powder they threw at the ambushers when they were ambushed on the other side of the sea. Even if the ambushers were to hide, the flaming horns would still be able to detect them once they came into contact with the powder. Among the tracking powder, there was a very faint smell. Most people couldn't smell it, but some beasts could. The powder Xiaofan sprinkled on Robber 11 and Robber 12 was the latter kind. The smell was faint and hard to detect, but Caesar and the rest could smell it. It wouldn't completely dissipate in a short period of time. After the patrol team returned, they passed on Xiaofan's message to Zheng Luo and Ao. They used a few beasts in the tribe with a keen sense of smell to wander around the tribe every day, closely inspecting the few areas where they could detect the smell. When Xiaofan captured Robber 11, he learned that Robber 7 was hiding nearby. He knew that the higher the ranking, the harder it was to detect them, so he used Robber 11 and Robber 12 as a medium. The people they came into close contact with, especially those who fought with them, would definitely be tainted by the smell. According to the results, Ao's findings. After Robber 11 and 12 were released, they sneaked in again, but they were only on the outskirts, they didn't infiltrate the tribe. Although Ao Xian didn't manage to catch them, he was sure that other than Robber 11 and Robber 12, there were other people who knew the two robbers lurking nearby. Among those people, there were some who were stronger than Robber 11 and Robber 12. They were the ones Xiaofan mentioned before, the ones who ranked higher in the robbers. It's not just Robber 11 and Robber 12, there's also Robber 7. There should be other robbers too, but they might not be united. Zheng Luo felt troubled. Anyone who was targeted by people who were good at hiding in the dark wouldn't feel good, especially when those people were famous robbers. Actually, what I'm confused about is, how did the robbers get here so quickly? Even if it's because of the result of our battle with Wuxia, there shouldn't be so many of them at once. Xiaofan expressed his thoughts. News didn't travel fast here. The 7 tribes were able to get here quickly because they had people keeping an eye on them. What about the robbers? They were scattered all over the place and didn't keep an eye on Yanjiao from the start. But now, there were so many of them at once, and they were all top robbers too. It was hard to catch them. What did Yanjiao have that attracted them? Even if they destroyed Wuxia, it shouldn't attract so many experts. The purpose of the robbers was different from others. Their purpose was to steal, not to test their strength. In the eyes of most of the people on the mainland, the Flaming Horn tribe was still a relatively backward tribe that only had brute force. The shaman agreed, indeed, I've heard that robbers love to steal valuable treasures. Could it be that they've taken a fancy to something in our tribe? Could it be the fire seed? Or the core seed? The old shaman thought for a moment. They couldn't come to a conclusion, but they had to be careful of the robbers. They didn't have to worry about the fire seed anymore, but they had to keep an eye on the core seed. Xiaofan carefully recalled the details of when he chased after Robber 11 and Robber 12. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that those two might not have been after the longevity leaf. Perhaps, the longevity leaf was just there. Otherwise, 2 years would have been more than enough time for them to sneak into Yanjiao. Why wait until now? Or let Robber 7 take a look? Speaking of which, if the one who sneaked into the Wanderers area was really Robber 7, then Robber 7's appearance was much earlier than the other tribes. Perhaps, before the battle with Wuxia, there were already people here. Something must have happened that we don't know about, Xiaofan said in a low voice. A straw rope fell from his hand. He didn't know what happened through the knot divination, but he had a feeling that the people who came this time might not be because of Wuxia. Do you think those tribesmen who have been loitering outside are hiding something from us? Xiaofan asked. That's not impossible. It's not the first time those tribes have been hiding things from us. Ao's tone was filled with strong dissatisfaction. Those people even said they wanted to have friendly exchanges and cooperate. Cooperate my ass. Ao weighed the axe in his hand. He had the urge to go out and chop those people up. He just didn't like them. If it wasn't for the fact that he knew it wasn't good to mess with them, he would have done it already. As they were talking, someone came to Xiaofan and told him that someone from the Hui tribe came to see him. It wasn't the 2 chiefs or the shaman, it was Xiaofan. Do you know who it is? Xiaofan asked the warrior who came to report. Gula from the Hui tribe. Just him alone? Yes. The shaman gestured to Xiaofan. Let's go and see what he wants to say. Okay. Xiaofan asked someone to take Gula to his room. Yanjiao's fire seed was no longer there. Even near the fire pit, there was no pressure from the fire seed. So when Gula was taken there, he didn't feel the suppression from Yanjiao's fire seed. Gula hesitated. He knew that Yanjiao's fire seed might have changed, but he couldn't figure out why. However, the fire seed was a secret of the tribe. If the Yanjiao people didn't want to talk about it, he couldn't get anything out of them. Continuing to ask would only make him more disgusted. This time, he came to find Xiaoxian for something else. In Xiaoxian's room, old Ku was in another room making stoneware. Caesar was guarding the door, so they weren't afraid of being eavesdropped. "What's the matter?" Xiaoxian handed Gula a cup of tea brewed with herb leaves. Gula drank a little absent-mindedly. The bitter taste made him frown, but he didn't care. After a sip, he put down the cup, thought for a while, and said to Xiaoxian, "Did you find any suspicious people around?" "You mean the two people I chased a few days ago?" Xiaoxian looked up at Gula. Although Gula looked calm, there was hesitation in his eyes. His fingers on his legs were tapping, as if he was thinking about a decision. After a pause, Gula's eyes finally settled, and his tone became more serious. "No, it's not just them. There may be more." Xiaoxian's heart jumped. There really was an inside story? "What do you mean?" Gula didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "You know, our tribes have been focusing on the desert for the past 2 years. If there's any movement in the desert, we'll know very quickly." Speaking of this, Gula smiled awkwardly. "But we haven't been aware of Yanjiao's movements." Gula was talking about the Yanjiao tribe suddenly bringing so many people out of the desert. They didn't find the reason, and this was something they had been wondering about. Looking at Xiaoxian, Gula saw that Xiaoxian didn't seem to want to explain. He coughed and continued, "Actually, after you brought so many people out of the desert, another group of people left not long after. They were people from Rock Hill City. When we first found out, we thought that the overlord of the desert, Rock Hill City, sent people out of the desert to eliminate the slave masters who escaped from the desert, because they were moving in this direction. But until now, I haven't seen anyone from Rock Hill City nearby." Xiaoxian said. "Of course you haven't seen them, because they entered from the other side of the fearsome beast forest. They didn't enter from your side," Gula pointed out. The fearsome beast forest was huge, and Yanjiao's side was only a small area at the border of the forest. It was possible that someone entered the forest from another place and Yanjiao didn't know. After all, from the time they brought people back to the old haunt until now, Yanjiao had only gone on one hunting expedition, and during this time, they only hunted for food nearby. If they didn't go deep into the forest, they naturally wouldn't know about other movements. "You mean, Rock Hill City's goal is the fearsome beast forest?" Xiaoxian asked. "Not for the slave masters who escaped, not for Wanshi, and not for Yanjiao, but just to enter the forest. It seems like they're looking for something, but we don't know exactly what they're looking for. When you brought back the new species of food, some people guessed that you might have discovered the secret." Gula smiled bitterly. In the end, they were disappointed. Yanjiao had only found a new type of food. Xiaoxian lowered his eyes in deep thought. What could make the Shi family of Rock Hill City send people all the way into the fearsome beast forest? Gula's words revealed a lot of information, but most importantly, those people's goal might not be Yanjiao, but something in the fearsome beast forest. At the same time, Gula also sent a message that they wanted to cooperate with Yanjiao. Compared to the other tribes, they favored Yanjiao. After saying what he wanted to say, Gula stayed for a while and left. Xiaoxian also told the shaman and chief about what Gula said, so that they could prepare in advance. Chapter 530. It was almost the end of the year. Under normal circumstances, it was already autumn and the temperature should have dropped. However, the fearsome beast forest was still active. There was no sign of autumn. In fact, the weather was even hotter. This time last year, it was the same. The old shaman sat on a rock and looked at the forest in the distance. He sighed. "No, this year is hotter than last year." The unusual changes in the weather made people uneasy. Fortunately, they were much calmer this year because of last year's experience. Plus, the two divisions of the Yanjiao tribe had reunited this year. It could calm people down and boost their morale. If there were any problems, they could solve it together. After experiencing the unusually cold winter on the other side of the sea, Zheng Luo and the others felt uncomfortable. But it was better to be warm than to be frozen, right? The warm weather also had its disadvantages. The animals in the forest, which should have started to wilt, were all unusually active. These flying insects were only one of them. When hunters entered the forest to hunt, they could clearly feel that these ferocious beasts had no intention of staying through the winter. They were quite energetic. Poisonous snakes and insects were also a problem. What's going on over there? The old shaman walked over with a taut face. She looked at a group of people rushing out of the forest not far away. Kiki, what's going on over there? The old shaman stopped Kiki, who was running away. Hearing the shaman call him, Kiki rushed over to explain. Shaman, I heard there are a lot of insects eating the cabbages in the fields outside. The chief is so angry that he wants us to help. A lot of insects? The two shamans were shocked. The first thing they thought of was the vanes of the sky planted in the forest. They hurried to the fields to check, afraid that there would be insects there. The good thing was that there was not a single flying insect in the area where the vanes of the sky were planted. Even underground, there were very few insects. These vanes of the sky seemed to be naturally resistant to insects. Of course, this was only limited to the unbroken vanes of the sky. Seeing this, the two shamans calmed down. They waved Kiki to go outside to help kill the insects. There were many things planted in the fields. Some had not sprouted, some had just sprouted. The ones that suffered the most were the cabbages. If it was in the past, those bugs wouldn't be so active. Worry appeared in the shaman's eyes. Excluding last year's situation, at this time of the year, under normal circumstances, many of the insects in the forest would be preparing for winter and would not fly around in groups. Ever since the people of Yanjiao came here, they had never encountered such an insect disaster. Perhaps it was because of the weather, but these insects that had no intention of staying through the winter all came out to move around, as if they were welcoming another spring. In addition, Yanjiao's expansion of farmland outside the forest attracted a lot of flying insects. Previously, they had only seen a small wave of flying insects occasionally. The people guarding the fields could still handle it, but now that there were so many of them, they could not handle it. They could only rely on the help of more soldiers. When Xiaofan arrived, the farm was in chaos. Swords, sabers, sticks, hammers, and so on were all huddled together noisily. Those flying insects were more than 20 centimeters long. Xiaofan swatted one down with his sword and pinched it to take a look. It was a light green flying insect with a slight tinge of yellow. It had two large compound eyes, a slightly wide chest, a slender abdomen, and two pairs of almost transparent wings with crisscrossing net-like patterns. It had 5 pairs of slender legs with sharp claws. The front pair of legs were used for catching. When it landed on a leaf, these slender claws could firmly hold on to the leaf, preventing it from falling. These flying insects also had chewing mouthparts, so they could chew leaves very quickly. It was these flying insects that made the soldiers in the tribe so anxious that they wanted to fly into flames. They could handle large ferocious beasts, but when faced with so many small flying insects, they could not handle them all at once. Moreover, when these flying insects flew high, it became harder for them to kill them. Using arrows? That was not suitable either. These flying insects could not fly too high, but after all, the soldiers could not fly. Even if they could jump a little higher, it would be difficult for them to kill the insects. Sometimes, when there were too many insects, there would be too many people. When killing the insects, some people would jump into the air and crash into them. Not only did they not kill the insects, but they also made their own people dizzy. Someone thought of pulling a net, but the area of the farmland was too big. It was impossible to cover all the land in one go. Moreover, unless the seams of the net were made smaller, it would be useless against these flying insects. They could squeeze through the seams of the net. It was not easy to get rid of this wave of insects, and the busy people finally took a break. Someone went to weave a net. "We can cover another batch today, but it's not a good idea to keep doing this." Mai looked at the gnawed leaves and said angrily. Xiaofan also thought about it. Farming had to let the crops see Yangguang. A net that was too dense could block some flying insects, but it would also block Yangguang. It was not a safe method. Spraying pesticides? Not to mention that they had not developed it yet. Even if they did, no one could guarantee that the descendants of the dead insects would be healthy. The conditions were limited, and there was no way to study the ratio more precisely. "It's up to us." Kiki, who was sitting at the side and panting, was sweating profusely. He had never felt that killing insects was so tiring. They had to kill the flying insects and pay attention not to step on the things planted in the ground. It was really difficult. Some people used a thick wooden board to hit the insects, but the effect was limited. You can make some small holes on the board, and then cut the bottom of the board to make a handle. That way, it's easier to hold, Xiaofan said. The eyes of the warrior holding the board lit up. He felt that this method was feasible, and then he took out his tools and started to cut the board. Some people were cleaning up the mess, picking up the dead insects on the ground and putting them together. Because the stupid birds they raised did not eat these insects, and the other animals they raised were mostly vegetarians, they made the dead insects into fertilizer to fertilize the land. This also made the people in the tribe feel relieved. "Little bug, come on. In the end, didn't you become fertilizer for the land?" Xiaofan looked around and walked back into the forest. He wanted to go to the casting room. It was night time. Because the cabbage in the field was no longer a secret, the surrounding area was not too tightly guarded. After experiencing the insect disaster during the day, the warriors guarding the farmland were a little tired. A figure sneaked in with the night, like a thin leaf blown by the wind. It lightly flipped over the wooden fence around the cabbage field and landed on the ground with a slight sound. After the black shadow landed on the ground, it listened carefully to make sure that it did not attract the attention of the people guarding the farmland. Then, it floated up again and landed on a cabbage like a butterfly. It left as soon as it touched the cabbage. There was only a short, cheat sound, which sounded like an inconspicuous insect. Still, no one paid attention to it. Hiding in the shadow of a cabbage taller than a person, the man took a cut leaf to his nose and sniffed it. This small leaf was cut from a cabbage ball near the middle. He had heard from the people in Yanjiao that the leaves near the middle of the cabbage ball were crisper and tasted better. He had been watching for a few days, and wanted to come and try the newly discovered vegetables in Yanjiao. Today, he finally had the chance. He was a vegetarian and did not like meat. He put the small leaf in his mouth and tasted it. After chewing it carefully, he felt that it was quite good. It was crispy and fresh. After hiding for so long, he finally got something he was satisfied with. The two moons in the sky cast moonlight that was not very bright. From time to time, there were clouds blocking the light. The guards who glanced inside did not notice that under a cabbage leaf taller than a person, there was a person hiding in the shadow that was darker than the night. After eating the leaf, the man looked around. When he jumped up, he quickly glanced around. Even though it was very dark, he could still see his surroundings clearly. He remembered that there was a bigger cabbage not far away, much bigger than the other cabbages around it. When he jumped up, he saw it from the corner of his eye. He decided to start with the biggest cabbage. He wondered how the people in Yanjiao would react, and they found out that the biggest cabbage in the field was missing a cabbage ball in the middle. Thinking about it, he was looking forward to it. Chapter 531. His original goal wasn't Yanjiao. He only knew that there was a tribe in this remote forest. But after he came here, he heard that Yanjiao destroyed the Wanchur tribe and forced the slave masters who escaped from the desert to leave. His interest was piqued. He didn't have to worry about the final goal for now. He wouldn't be able to find it in a short period of time anyway. He would let the others explore the path while he stayed in Yanjiao for a few days. What he didn't expect was that the Flaming Horn tribe was even more difficult to deal with than the legend said. He was discovered several times, but he was fast and had sharp instincts. Every time, he could escape before the other party caught up with him. This was the main reason why he dared to continue staying in the Flaming Horn tribe. As long as he could escape, it didn't matter if he was discovered or not. Yanjiao couldn't catch him anyway. However, the Flaming Horn tribe's territory in the forest was too heavily guarded. He had been guarding it for so long, but he still couldn't sneak in. Especially the last time, he wandered around the Wanderer's area for so long. He almost took a step forward but was discovered by someone. Thinking about Robber 11 and Robber 12 who were caught once, he sneered. They weren't even in the top 10, how could they compare to him? Did Yanjiao really think that just because they caught one or two robbers, they could catch all the robbers? How naive. He planned to cut down the biggest cabbage in Yanjiao's territory to teach Yanjiao a lesson. The more he thought about it, the more satisfied he was. Yanjiao must have placed a lot of importance on this piece of land. If the cabbage was stolen, they would definitely send more people over. Then, when Yanjiao had their eyes on the cabbage field, he would find a chance to sneak into the forest. I'm so smart. At night, a black shadow moved silently under the tall cabbage. It was more agile than a snake in the dark. Still, no guards discovered this place. Looking at the biggest cabbage that was getting closer and closer, he raised his eyebrows slightly, bent his knees, and flew up like a piece of grass blown up by the breeze. The thin black knife in his hand was like a beast that had found its prey. It finally flicked its sharp claws and pointed directly at the vegetable ball in the middle of the cabbage. But just as he was about to attack Cabbage Ball, his scalp went numb, and he felt an intense sense of danger. It was as if a pair of eyes had appeared in the darkness of the night. No, not just one pair, but two. Two people had discovered him. A spear suddenly attacked, forcefully breaking through the air with a sizzling sound, as if a poisonous snake that had been waiting in the dark had finally bared its fangs. The spear came very quickly and suddenly, giving no time for people to prepare. Moreover, the black shadow just happened to jump into the air. Logically speaking, people who jumped into the air would have their movement severely restricted. However, before the spear could reach it, the black shadow that leaped up was like a thin leaf that was suddenly pushed by another air current. It suddenly flipped over, almost sticking close to the spear, and then retreated safely without any injuries. Ao did not expect this person to be able to strangely change direction and turn in the air without any external help. The sudden attack just now was dodged by the opponent. Ever since he knew that the thief was difficult to deal with, Ao had thought of many ways. In the end, he decided to stay in one place and hide all his breath. Before discovering the target, he would not use any of his totemic power. Even his breathing and heartbeat were as weak as possible, making him appear no different from the others. He also did not put all his attention on the person who had sneaked into the cabbage field. Xiaofan had told him that the opponent had extremely sharp observation skills. Unless he deliberately did not pay attention to the opponent, he would be able to escape as soon as he saw him. So, Ao only took action when Xiaofan gave the signal. Before that, Ao would pretend that he did not see the thief. Still want to run. The corners of Ao's eyes were raised high. He flipped into the cabbage field, took a big step, and leaped out, waving the stone axe in his hand. In an instant, a majestic aura rose up like an angry wave, pressing forward, as if to drown the person in front. The domineering aura spread out, enveloping the entire cabbage field. As the head of a division, Ao's strength was unquestionable. If it were other warriors under the pressure of Ao's surging aura, even if they did not make a mistake, their movements would be slowed down. But, the black shadow that retreated was not the same. Strangely, the aura of the fire seed that was completely different from Yanjiao's suddenly soared, like a strong wind that suddenly blew in a moonless night, as if everything around was blocked, making people feel hazy and confused. That black shadow was like a sharp cold air that rose from the darkness, stirring in the dark night, dispersing the pressure that Ao brought. All of this happened in an instant. In just one exchange, the opponent not only dodged the attack, but also turned the tables on him in terms of aura. In order to hide better and hide from the vigilant thief, O did not discuss with the guards around the cabbage field. But, after hearing the commotion, the guards around the cabbage field were alarmed, and wanted to stop the figure that was about to escape. Warriors with all kinds of weapons jumped up and stood on the surrounding wooden fences, like building a long human wall, blocking the escape route of the thief. There were still people coming from outside. Ao was very confident. There was no escape. That thief would not be able to escape. The clouds in the sky drifted, and one of the two moons that were hidden was revealed. In the face of Yanjiao's tight defense and the pursuit of the people led by Ao, the thief did not panic. He still had a piece of cabbage leaf in his mouth, and there was no trace of nervousness in his eyes. His pupils were like a stubborn stone lying in the dark night, and a cunning light flashed in his eyes. Whoosh! It was like the whistling of an arrow that was shot into the air. Whoosh! 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 A series of sounds rang out, as if someone had suddenly shot out millions of arrows. However, this was only the sound emitted from that person's body. His totemic power suddenly erupted and rose to the peak in an instant. Under the urging of the fire seed's power, the air that spurted out from the inner layer of his skin was like a sudden miniature hurricane that rushed out of his pores. The person who landed on the ground squatted slightly, then suddenly shot up like a rocket that had its fuse ignited. Following the whistling sound, he flew out at an extremely fast speed and instantly distanced himself from Ao La, who was chasing behind him. The other party didn't flee in any other direction. He ran straight for the wooden fence at the edge of the vegetable field. The path he took was the shortest way to leave the vegetable field, and the row of Yanjiao soldiers in front of him didn't seem to be a threat to him. Not taking a detour, but directly crashing into it. Seeing the figure rushing straight at them, the Yanjiao soldiers were shocked, but they still gripped the weapons in their hands tightly and prepared to block him. However, they heard an even more rapid whistling sound, like someone had whistled. The black figure that had rushed to the wooden fence suddenly turned in the air and rose up, then rushed out of the vegetable field again, breaking through the encirclement that had been painstakingly formed. The other party's sudden rise was completely out of the Yanjiao soldiers' expectations. It was too late for them to jump up and stop him, so they could only watch as the other party flew past them. With their leader leading the way and so many people, they couldn't stop a thief who ran into the vegetable field to steal vegetables. Ao La looked at the figure that was getting farther and farther away, and his heart was filled with depression. He had heard Xiaofan say that robbers were difficult to catch, and now he was experiencing it firsthand. Strange movements, erratic movements, and unexpected techniques. Was this what a robber was like? Under the moonlight, the person who had run out of the vegetable field smiled wider and wider. You want to catch me? You think I'm trash like Robber 11 and Robber 12, who couldn't even squeeze into the top 10? So what if you've been plotting an ambush? So what if you've discovered me? In the end, all you can do is watch me run away. Ha! Yanjiao, that's all there is to it. Just as he thought this, his eyelids twitched, as if a cold current was flowing through his hair and into his brain. He was so shocked that all the hair on his body stood on end. Who else? A whistling sound came from beside his ear, like a huge palm slapping him across the air, so fast that he couldn't change his direction. His pupils suddenly dilated as he tried to see what it was that was sweeping towards him. What was that? A net? No, it wasn't a net. No matter what it was, run. However, the net-like thing followed the black figure closely, and with the sound of air friction, it whipped the black figure in the air. Clang! The loud sound carried a lingering tremor. It exploded in the dark night and spread to everyone's ears, spreading to even further places. Everyone who heard this sound wondered if the person who was whipped by that thing would have his bones separated from his body and fall apart like the trembling aftershock. The black figure was sent flying by the huge net, and the whooshing sound from his body came to an abrupt stop, like a chicken that was suddenly strangled by the neck. Drawing an arc in the air, the black shadow finally fell to the ground, rolled a few times, and stopped moving. Ao, who had jumped out of the vegetable field, looked at the motionless figure on the ground in the distance, and motioned for the others to quickly tie up the person, regardless of whether he was dead or alive. After giving the order, Ao looked at Xiaofan, who was standing there. Xiaofan stood there calmly, holding a strange-shaped thing in his hand. The lower end of the thing was like the handle of a large spear, and the upper end, just by looking at it, looked like a square net about the length of two people. However, if one looked closely, they would find that the net was fixed, not soft like a net made of straw. It was hard and connected to a long handle. Ao was surprised when he saw Xiaofan go to the casting room and make this thing today. Seeing Ao and the others staring at him, Xiaofan held the long handle and turned it, and the hard net in the eyes of the tribesmen above also turned. I'm here to hit flying insects. I didn't expect the first one to be a flying thief. Xiaofan laughed. Chapter 532. Many people heard the commotion at the Yanjiao's cabbage field, but they didn't know what happened. They only heard the next day that the patrol team caught a vegetable thief. Are all thieves stealing vegetables these days? The wanderers couldn't understand. They thought that if they wanted to steal, they should steal the grains instead of the cabbage field, which was heavily guarded. Grains were better than anything that could fill their stomachs. What a strange thief. The few figures hiding among the wanderers were hesitant. They tried to find someone to investigate. Unfortunately, it was late at night. Usually, after dark, other than the patrolling warriors, everyone else would be resting in their houses. Even if they heard the commotion, they wouldn't go out to see if the patrol team didn't inform them. With their weak bodies, the slightest mistake could cost them their lives. Being too curious would kill them. Therefore, after the few figures asked around, they could only return with a stomach full of doubts. In a place where the patrol team and wanderers weren't paying attention, the few scattered figures gathered again. Who do you think was the one who was caught last night? A slightly low voice asked. Judging from the commotion last night, could it be Robber 7? From what I know, he seemed to have been interested in that vegetable field for a long time. Another hoarse voice said, as if his throat had been severely injured. It gave off a very uncomfortable feeling. Robber 7? Impossible, absolutely impossible. If Xiaofan was here, he would definitely recognize the owner of this voice. The one who spoke was Robber 11, who was caught by Xiaofan before. Robber 7's escaping ability is the best among us. Even if he was discovered, he could still escape from Yanjiao's pursuit. It shouldn't be him, Robber 12 agreed. The first person who asked the question was silent for a while. He straightened up and looked around. But Robber 7 hasn't appeared yet. Although he doesn't like to move with us, he wouldn't refuse our invitation. Even if he didn't want to show up, he would have done something instead of doing nothing. Hearing this, the others fell silent. They really didn't believe and didn't want to believe that the person who was caught was Robber 7. If it was really Robber 7, what could the others do? It was dangerous. After another half an hour, Robber 7 was still nowhere to be seen. It should be him. The hoarse voice spoke slowly, like a blade scraping against a rock, giving people goosebumps. The expressions on their faces kept changing as they each had their own thoughts. We can't stay in Yanjiao any longer. Let's leave this place and go into the forest to look for something, the first person said in a low voice with a cautious tone. As for saving Robber 7, none of them had the intention to do so at the moment. Comradeship? What a joke. Thieves always looked out for each other. How could there be something like camaraderie? It was his own fault for being caught. He was unlucky and deserved it. Wouldn't it be better to do something proper instead of stealing vegetables when you're so bored? If Robber 7 died, the other robbers behind him would be more than happy to take his place. Robber 11 was the happiest among them. As long as one of the robbers in front of him died, he would be able to take a step forward. Ha ha ha, thinking about it this way, it was a good thing. The other two didn't care about Robber 7, let alone Robber 11 and Robber 12. They were able to escape from Yanjiao last time because Xiaofan asked them to do something. He had promised them and kept his promise. However, if they were caught again, it would be hard for them to escape. Without any hesitation, they split up and left Yanjiao's territory. They entered Fearsome Beast Forest from a place outside Yanjiao's territory. At the same time, in Yanjiao's territory, in a stone house. The person who was tied up in a shape finally moved. When Robber 7 woke up, he felt his bones creaking. Every movement was painful as if they were crushed. There was a bloody taste in his mouth and his face was swollen. His head was still dizzy and when he opened his eyes, his vision was blurry. He couldn't see his surroundings clearly. Other than the bloody taste in his mouth, there was a bitter taste of herbs. He knew what it was and guessed that the Yanjiao people didn't want him to die just like that. They wanted to get more value from him, so they fed him some medicine so that he wouldn't be injured to the point where he couldn't speak. Robber 7 quickly analyzed the situation he was in and began to think about how he could escape safely. He knew that the other robbers wouldn't come to his rescue so easily. He could only rely on himself if he wanted to live. What should he offer in exchange for Yanjiao? What could he say to fool the Yanjiao people? He had miscalculated. He was too confident and didn't expect Yanjiao to use such a strange thing to knock him down. Moreover, the person who used the strange thing was very fast. He didn't even have time to change his position and was almost sent flying. Hiss, every movement of his face hurt. Half of his body was directly hit, including this half of his face. He was fast but his body couldn't compare to the Yanjiao people. As the saying goes, the body is as light as a swallow, but if you take a heavy blow, you'll feel better. Wasn't it just stealing vegetables? How could he end up like this? Robber 7 sighed for himself. He scanned the stone house. There were a few auras in the house. Robber 7 couldn't see them clearly but he could recognize two of them. As someone who often stole in the dark, he could accurately identify people's auras, even if it was just for a moment. Among the people in the stone house, one was the one who threw the spear at him last night. The other was the one who suddenly appeared at the end of his coma. You're awake? Robber 7 heard an unfamiliar voice, breaking the silence in the stone house. Zheng Luo walked to the person who didn't seem to be fully awake. He looked at the half-swollen face of the robber. His original appearance was blurred. You're Robber 7? Asked Zheng Luo. Robber 7 was stunned. He didn't expect Zheng Luo to reveal his identity so quickly. He thought about it carefully. The only people who could reveal his identity were his own people. Among the people who infiltrated Yanjiao, only Robber 11 and Robber 12 were caught. Robber 7 made a mental note of those two. His mind raced as he tried to figure out how to deal with the upcoming predicament. He heard that Yanjiao people were very barbaric. Would they eat human flesh? Would they cook him? Maybe they'd even put a few cabbage leaves in the pot. Wait, now wasn't the time to think about cabbage. My robber number is indeed 7. Robber 7 didn't deny it. In fact, most of the time, they were happy for others to know their robber number, which was the code name of a robber. However, what they enjoyed was the helpless look on people's faces when they mentioned their name after a successful theft. They didn't want to be beaten half to death before they even succeeded. Robber 7's gaze shifted from Zheng Luo in front of him to the people behind him, finally stopping at Xiaofan. So this was the guy who knocked him out? Robber 7 made a mental note of this. What is your motive for infiltrating Yanjiao? Zheng Luo asked. My motive? Robber 7 wanted to say to steal vegetables, but he knew these people might not believe him. It wouldn't help him escape. Robber 7 rolled his eyes and said, my motive is the same as those tribesmen who are still here. Zheng Luo and Ao quickly glanced at Xiaofan. This was similar to the information they received from the Hui tribe. Zheng Luo waved the knife in his hand and pressed the blade against Robber 7's neck. He asked, what are you looking for? The coldness of the blade made Robber 7 tremble, but he quickly calmed down and said, don't do anything rash. If you push me too far, I won't say anything. Don't even think about getting an answer from those tribesmen. They don't know either. What are the people from Rock Hill City looking for? Xiaofan suddenly asked. Robber 7 looked at Xiaofan in surprise. Originally, he wanted to whet the appetite of the Yanjiao people. The higher the Yanjiao people's appetite, the easier it would be for him to negotiate. He didn't expect to be asked so directly. Although he was puzzled as to why Xiaofan could say Rock Hill City directly, it was understandable when he thought about the tribesmen who were still here. This kid must have heard it from them, right? All of their actions were because of a single sentence from the people of Rock Hill City. If I tell you, will you let me go? Robber 7 asked. Zheng Luo frowned. Why did they all like to negotiate now? But he still nodded. Sure. You agreed too quickly. I don't believe you. Robber 7 shifted his gaze to Xiaofan. He felt this kid was unreliable. He continued to look at the two older shamans. His eyes darted back and forth between them. Sure. The old shaman nodded. Shaman. Ao disagreed. He felt these thieves should be crushed to death instead of letting them go. After they left, they would come back for a second time. The shaman raised his hand to stop Ao. He then looked at the old woman who was still sitting calmly. What do you think? Sure. The old woman said the same. Although they knew that letting this robber go meant he might come back again, compared to what they wanted to know, the two shamans felt this deal was worth it. They also wanted to know what Rock Hill City was up to. Did they extend their reach to Fearsome Beast Forest after taking over the desert? Robber 7's eyes lit up when he heard the word shaman. If it was someone else, they might go back on their word. But if the shaman agreed, the possibility of going back on their word was quite small. Robber 7 saw the opportunity and cleared his throat. The people from Rock Hill City are looking for something. And that thing is most likely to be in Fearsome Beast Forest. What is it? Zheng Luo asked. Green-faced fanged beast. Chapter 533. Even the two shamans couldn't stay calm when they heard the name, let alone Zheng Luo, who was standing in front of Robber 7. That was why when Robber 7 said the name, Zheng Luo couldn't hide the shock and excitement in his eyes. At the same time, the people who spoke were no better than Zheng Luo and the rest. Robber 7 wanted to see the Yanjiao people's confused expressions, not what. So it's them. Obviously, they already knew about it. Didn't they say that other than the people of Rock Hill City, no one else knew about it? Even the arrogant slave masters in the desert, other than the Shi family in Rock Hill City, no one else knew about it, let alone the tribesmen outside the desert. How did the Yanjiao people know about it? Robber 7 was bewildered. Xiaofan didn't expect Robber 7 to give such an answer. If they didn't believe that Yanjiao people who knew about the green-faced fanged beast wouldn't leak information, they would have suspected that there was a spy. Xiaofan found out about the green-faced fanged beast from Gongjiahang. Then, how did the Shi family in Rock Hill City know about it? If they knew, why didn't they send people to search for it? The Shi family never looked for the green-faced fanged beast before, asked Xiaofan. Robber 7 recovered from his shock. He thought about it and decided not to hide it. He couldn't put himself in an advantageous position. The Yanjiao people knew more than he expected. Now, he could only use more information in exchange for Yanjiao's promise. Actually, the Shi family in Rock Hill City had sent people to search for it a long time ago, but they couldn't find it. Rock Hill City used to be the city that sent the most slaves out of all the desert cities. But because there were other people in the desert, Rock Hill City didn't want to make a big deal out of it, said Robber 7. Xiaofan remembered a long time ago, where he first met Shi Shu. There was a slave stronghold there, and Rock Hill City definitely had more than one stronghold outside the desert. He used to think that they were just recruiting slaves and expanding their army. Now that he thought about it, they might be looking for the green-faced fanged beasts. Before Yan Jiao came to the fearsome beast mountain forest, other people rarely came. Naturally, they didn't notice anyone entering the forest. When Yan Jiao came back, it happened to be a few years before Rock Tomb City planned to unify the desert. They didn't have time to care about the fearsome beast mountain forest, so they didn't see anyone entering the mountain. Besides, the ferocious beast mountain forest was huge. Even if the Yanjiao hunted, it was impossible for them to travel through the entire ferocious beast mountain forest. It was possible that no one else had entered the forest. Now that the situation in the desert had been settled, the other side once again began to act without any scruples. However, Xiaofan felt that Rock Hill City's operation this time was a little too rushed. Green-faced fanged beast, what does it look like? Zheng Luo and Ao's breathing quickened. Ever since they found out that the green-faced fanged beast's blood could be used to forge good weapons, they had been thinking about it. Unfortunately, they couldn't find it. If they could get more detailed information about the green-faced fanged beast, it would be easier for them to find it. Robber 7 didn't show it on his face, but he was already thinking about it. So the Yanjiao people didn't know what the green-faced fanged beast looked like. Instead of looking for it himself, why not tell the Yanjiao people and let the Yanjiao people go through the trouble? Then when they found it, he could steal it himself. Robber 7 thought to himself. It was said that once the scar was healed, one would forget the pain. This person was still tied up and he was already thinking about how to steal the next time. I've seen a drawing and memorized it, but my hands are tied up. How can I draw it for you? Robber 7 lifted his chin and pointed at the straw rope that tied him up. This kind of rope was too strong. The more he struggled, the tighter it became. It was a terrible feeling to be unable to move. Zheng Luo looked at the two shamans. Seeing that they nodded, he went over and untied the vines around Robber 7's arms. Xiaofan took out a leaf that was half the width of his arm and handed it over with the beast ink brush and paint. He had already prepared this beforehand. He originally planned to pry something useful out of Robber 7's mouth. He didn't expect Robber 7 to have no intention of hiding anything and even brought such a surprise. Robber 7 loosened his grip and asked Zheng Luo to untie the vines around his legs. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to draw well in this uncomfortable position. After some thought, Zheng Luo tied Robber 7's legs. This time, he didn't tie them up in the shape of the Chinese character or fasten them to a wooden stake. Instead, he made him sit on the ground. Draw properly. Ao's patience with this bandit was running out. He felt that Robber 7 was too cunning and couldn't be trusted. If it wasn't for the shaman's promise not to kill him, he would have chopped him down with his axe. Robber 7 ignored Ao's murderous aura. He knew that the two elders in the house were of high status, but he didn't understand why there were two shamans in Yanjiao. No matter what, since the two shamans in Yanjiao promised to let him go, as long as the information he provided was worth it, the two elders would definitely keep their promise. Hence, he wasn't in a hurry. Robber 7 twisted his wrist and frowned. When he moved his arm, he could still hear the bones in his body creaking. The beating he received last night was too heavy. One of his arms was fractured and he couldn't draw, so he could only use the other. Enduring the pain, Robber 7 picked up the brush and dipped it in paint. He recalled the painting that he had seen before and started to paint it one stroke at a time in a serious manner. For the sake of his own escape and for Yanjiao to find the item as soon as possible, he didn't intend to play any tricks. He was still waiting for Yanjiao to find the item so that he could steal it and trade it with the Shi family in the desert for something better. However, as Robber 7 drew, he stared at the two leaders with wide eyes. Their expressions were getting worse and worse. "Alright, I'm done." Robber 7 looked at the result of his drawing and nodded in satisfaction. Just as he was about to continue negotiating, he raised his head and saw the two people standing beside him with dark faces. Whoosh, the two leaders attacked almost simultaneously. One held a knife and the other an axe. They came at Robber 7 from each side. "Wait!" Robber 7 quickly shouted. He was injured and couldn't dodge easily. He didn't understand why the two had such a reaction. He was anxious. The tip of the knife and the axe were on both sides of Robber 7's neck. In the next moment, his head would be separated from his body. No matter how calm a robber was, under such a murderous attack, he couldn't stay calm. "You Yanjiao broke your promise. How can you go back on your words? How can you face your totems? We didn't keep our promise. Why don't you take a look at what you've drawn? How dare you fool us?" Ao held his breath. His nostrils flared and his hot breath came out like an angry bull. "When did I fool you?" Robber 7 was furious. He had drawn exactly the same. "The drawing I saw was exactly like this. I swear on my name as a thief." Robber 7 straightened his neck, his face full of dissatisfaction. "How dare you accuse me of drawing so well? You don't know how to appreciate it. Yanjiao people are really vulgar. They're just like those small tribesmen living in the border areas." Both sides were red in the face and neck as they confronted each other. The shaman, who was sitting on the side, coughed awkwardly and signaled Ao and Zheng Luo to put down their knives and axes. She then looked at the drawing that Xiaofan handed over. Ao wanted to say something, but the shaman gave him a look. Ao didn't understand at first, but after calming down and thinking about it, he understood. He couldn't help but blink a few times. Xiaofan knew Ao quite well. Ao would only blink uncontrollably when he felt guilty. Xiaofan also knew what the shaman meant. In fact, Xiaofan believed Robber 7 when he said that the drawing made up of a few simple lines was the result of absolute seriousness. He didn't intend to fool them at all. Because most of the people here were good at drawing, let alone a drawing that was passed down from 1,000 years ago. There was only one possibility for the people of Rock Hill City to know about the green-faced fanged beast. Someone from the group that came 1,000 years ago knew about it. Therefore, the person who drew the green-faced fanged beast must be someone from 1,000 years ago. Based on this, Robber 7's words could be trusted. Ao and Zheng Luo understood. If this was a few years ago, they would have drawn the same thing, but not as good as Robber 7's drawing. However, because of Xiaofan's drawings, their drawing skills improved a lot, and other drawings weren't good enough for them. Now that they suddenly saw such a simple drawing, they just couldn't accept it. They were too excited just now and were disappointed when they saw Robber 7's drawing. After calming down, they looked at Robber 7's drawing seriously. Something that looked like a deer but wasn't a deer, a sheep but wasn't a sheep. Was this the green-faced fanged beast? Ao glanced at the drawing in disgust and said to Robber 7, "Tell me more about the situation. Who can understand a drawing like this?" On Robber 7's swollen face, his eyes that were originally squinted into slits widened due to his anger. Looking down on my drawing? However, he had no choice but to lower his head. Robber 7 was still hoping that the other party would fulfill his promise and let him go. He could only take a deep breath, suppress his anger, and tell them what he knew. In fact, Xiaofan and the others had already heard what Robber 7 said. Green-faced fanged beast, small in size, green in color, thick skin, hooves without horns, sharp fangs growing upwards, fierce in nature, and fond of eating grass. Anything more than that would be gone. That's all? Ao looked at Robber 7. That's all. Robber 7 saw that Ao's murderous aura was rising again and knew that he wasn't satisfied with what he said. He quickly added, "The person who told us really only said this. However, there was one more thing. He told us that if we really met the green-faced fanged beast, we would know for sure." "The person who showed you the drawing was from the Sure family of Rock Hill City?" Xiaofan asked. "No." It was obvious that Robber 7 didn't want to answer this question. This was the secret of the robbers. Even the most cowardly robbers had their own principles. Some things could be sold out, but some things could never be revealed. "How much did the people of Rock Hill City give you?" Xiaofan asked again. "If we find the green-faced fanged beast, we can bring it to them in exchange for anything we want." This was something that could still be said. "It seems that you robbers have always been in contact with Rock Hill City. Otherwise, you wouldn't have mobilized so many people at once," Xiaofan said. Robber 7 pretended to be dead and didn't say anything else. After some questioning, Yan Jiao and the others reluctantly believed Robber 7's words and kept their promise to let him go. They blindfolded him and threw him out of the forest. They thought that he was severely injured and couldn't walk. However, after landing on the ground, he escaped with the speed of a bird and disappeared from their sight. "I told you he was faking it," Ao said angrily. "Xian." "What?" "The next time you see him, beat him to death." "All right." Chapter 534. Ao, Zhengluo, and the others couldn't wait any longer after knowing that Rock Hill City's goal was to find the green-faced fanged beast. In their opinion, the green-faced fanged beast was equivalent to a higher-level weapon. With a higher-level weapon, the tribe's combat power would greatly increase. Who wouldn't want to find it? Since the Sure family of Rock Hill City had sent people to Fearsome Beast Forest to search, did it mean that there really was a green-faced fanged beast in Fearsome Beast Forest? Not necessarily. However, if there was a place on this continent where the green-faced fanged beast could be found, it would be Fearsome Beast Forest. There were no other places that were suitable for the beasts to live in. Searching for the green-faced fanged beast was definitely not an easy task. Otherwise, the Sure family of Rock Hill City wouldn't have sent so many people into Fearsome Beast Forest. They even hired robbers, who were good at excavating treasures. Is there really a green-faced fanged beast in Fearsome Beast Forest? After so many years, the people of Rock Hill City still haven't found it, right? Tower said. Not necessarily. Even if they did find it, as long as they don't say anything, no one would know. If there really isn't one, Rock Hill City has existed for almost 1,000 years. Why would they keep an eye on Fearsome Beast Forest? Generations of rulers of Rock Hill City had sent people to search for it. This meant that they had never given up on the forest. If there really wasn't one, why would they be so persistent? Rock Hill City hid too well. If it wasn't for the chaos in the past 2 years, no one would know that Rock Hill City had been brewing a huge conspiracy. No one knew the true strength of Rock Hill City. Perhaps they had even more trump cards up their sleeves that no one knew about. That's true. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go find it. I'll be the first to join. Duo Kong couldn't wait. No rush. Xiaofan looked in the direction of the tribes outside the forest. Those people haven't been dealt with yet. Since the Hui tribe expressed their intention to cooperate, Yanjiao was naturally willing. No matter how arrogant they were, they didn't think that they could challenge the other tribes at the same time. It was a good thing to form an alliance. Go tell Gula to prepare to enter the forest. Xiaofan said. What if the other tribes want to go with us? Gigu asked. Then let them show their sincerity. Among the people from the Hui tribe who came to Yanjiao, there were actually two factions. One faction supported abandoning the other tribes and joining forces with Yanjiao, while the other faction believed that Yanjiao was not worth cooperating with. They only had strength and might be a little scheming, but they were far inferior to the other tribes. However, in the end, they still decided to choose Yanjiao. First of all, although they said that they were cooperating with several other tribes, their relationship was not that good. Usually, they did not have close contact with each other. Most of the time, they still needed to inquire about information on their own, so they did not get many benefits. Secondly, they could no longer tolerate those people's overly cautious and hesitant style of doing things. In recent years, the people of the Hui tribe only felt that something big might happen. The shaman of the Hui tribe also predicted that there might be a huge change in the near future. He wasn't sure when, but he was sure it wouldn't be far away. This made the Hui tribe, who lived a peaceful life on the grasslands, unable to remain calm. Something that could affect them was definitely not to be underestimated. Unfortunately, up until now, the progress was really disappointing. They could not wait any longer. On this day, several people of the Hui tribe were arguing about cooperation with Yanjiao. Since Gula went to find Xiaofan, many days had passed, but Yanjiao still did not give them a satisfactory answer. Some people started to get anxious. Didn't they see that the other tribes were laughing at them? They didn't even want to go out, afraid that once they went out, they would see a circle of mocking faces. Just as they were complaining, Gigu came over. Pack up, we're going into the mountains. Into the mountains? Gu La's eyes lit up. When Gigu said go into the mountains, it was definitely not to hunt, but to look for something. Do you already know what you're looking for? She, who was at the side, asked with uncertainty. Gigu did not answer directly, but gave him a meaningful smile. Almost as soon as Gigu left, the people of the other tribes rushed to the Hui tribe's place to ask. When they found out that the Hui tribe was going into the mountains with the Yanjiao people, they could not sit still and went to find the leaders of Yanjiao. They did not believe that the Yanjiao people would know what Rock Hill City was looking for. They only wanted to go with them because they wanted Yanjiao to lead the way. After living outside the mountains for a long time, they would definitely feel uncomfortable after entering the forest. Fearsome Beast Forest would not give them enough time to adapt. If they went in rashly, they would easily lose their lives. As for Yanjiao's sincerity, they also understood that Yanjiao wanted a guide fee. This was easy to negotiate. Thus, the three leaders took the promises of those people and went to find Xiaofan. A large boat from the Longboat tribe, half a cart of jade from the Mang tribe, half a cart of silk cloth from the Eight Limbs tribe, a strong bow from the Tian Shan tribe. After listening to the three team leaders, Xiaofan raised his eyebrows. Let them double the original amount. Huh? Not just the three leaders, even the two leaders who had been listening felt that Xiaofan's demands were too high. Those people might not agree, said Zheng Luo. Disagree? If they don't agree, then scram. Give them 2 days to come up with an answer. Otherwise, let them leave on their own, said Xiaofan calmly. After some thought, Ao nodded. Let's do that. Those people had been here for so long, did they really think that Yanjiao would tolerate them forever? They thought that Yanjiao cared about them. 2 days later. The three leaders came back with the results of their discussion. The other tribes have all agreed, only the Tian Shan tribe refused. They've already left. Looks like they plan to enter the mountains themselves. Duo Kong felt refreshed when he thought about the other tribes' dark faces. Did they really think that Yanjiao was free? They were just a little late in collecting the fees. Oh, by the way, the people of the Hui tribe said that they would send a batch of good horses from the grassland after this incident. Gue he smiled and said, the people of the Hui tribe are very sincere. The other tribes had already sent people back to prepare things. Other than those who planned to enter the mountains with Yanjiao, they would also leave a few people behind to deliver the promised sincerity. When do we leave? The shaman asked Xiaoxian. 2 days later. The weather is getting weirder, said Xiaoxian as he looked at a flowering tree not far away. The berries of that tree were used to make paint, so when the tribe built houses, they didn't remove them. They had other uses. However, this kind of tree usually only blossoms when it is close to summer. It only bears fruit when the summer is hot. According to normal calculations, it should be almost winter now. But now, in this winter, the weather might be closer to summer. The mountains might be more dangerous than before. The ferocious beasts that had their lives disrupted might be more irritable, so they had to be extra careful. Entering the mountains at this time, they might encounter some dangers that they wouldn't have encountered in the past. They were only going to explore the mountains, but they weren't going to hunt, so they didn't need to bring a lot of people. This time, Xiaoxian planned to only bring 5 people, but with the addition of the other tribes, it would be a lot more. In the fields outside the forest, in the cabbage field, new leaves were growing, and many small cabbages that had been transplanted had also begun to grow spherical leaves. The leaves wrapped around each other. Maybe it was because the land here was large and there was enough fertilizer, but the cabbages changed almost every day and grew very fast. Because of the weather, combined with last year's situation, crops that shouldn't have been planted in winter were now being planted. Xiaoxian's giant fly swatter was also used by the people patrolling the fields. Because metal was too rare, they only made one. The others used similar swatters, but they weren't made of metal. They were made of wood, but the Yanjiao people were too strong, so it was too easy to break them. So, every time they encountered a swarm of insects, the people guarding the fields would rush to use the metal swatter. When the swatter swatted the flying insects, it would swat a bunch of them down. It was very satisfying. In the tribe, life was still the same as before, but many times, people felt like they had just transitioned from spring to summer. Every time they moved, they would sweat profusely. Xiaoxian brought the medicine and other things that he had prepared. This time, the other 4 people who were going into the mountains with him were Duo Kong, Tua, Mai, and Xiang Chen. They were only going to see if there were any green-faced fanged beasts. Maybe they would look for traces of the slaves who entered the mountains to see if they could get more information from them. Compared to the calmness of the Yanjiao people, the people from the other tribes already felt uncomfortable before they even entered the depths of the mountains. The mountains were filled with all kinds of noises and screams. Even the wind that blew carried a sense of danger. Unforeseen danger was even more frightening. However, in order to understand what Rock Hill City, the ruler of the desert, valued, they still had to go in. It wasn't just the Hui tribe. In fact, the other tribes also had a premonition that there might be a huge change in the near future. However, they couldn't predict what it was. They could only try their best to understand all kinds of doubts and find more protection. This was also why they were willing to take out more things in exchange for their companions. Between giving up and getting something, they still had a sense of balance. The scorching sun hung high in the sky. In the mountains, tall trees gathered together. There were no yellow leaves. Even the trees seemed to have lost their original rules of growth. They were lush and thriving, without a sense of desolation. All kinds of flying insects flew between the leaves. There were also pairs of eyes hidden behind the leaves, either vigilant or bloodthirsty. Chu Su and the other 7 Mang tribesmen followed Huang Yi, following the footsteps of the Yanjiao people in front of them. The presence of the surrounding people was too strong. It was difficult for him to ignore them. However, the Yanjiao people said that he didn't need to pay attention to them. As long as he ignored them, they wouldn't take the initiative to attack. However, the Yanjiao people had long been used to this kind of thing, but the others were not. Chu Su couldn't help but look up at a tree that was 10 times thicker than him. There was a figure on the branch. He couldn't see what it was because it was too similar to the color of the bark. If it wasn't for his keen eyesight, Chu Su wouldn't have noticed it. It looked over with undisguised murderous eyes. It bared its fangs, as if it was going to pounce on them in the next moment. Chu Su shuddered and quickly looked away. He didn't look at the eyes on the tree. It seemed that the murderous look in his eyes faded a little. Sure enough, the Yanjiao people were very experienced in dealing with these things. No wonder the elders of the tribe agreed to let the Yanjiao people lead the way instead of going into the mountains themselves. It really saved them a lot of unnecessary trouble. Chapter 535. It was said that a long time ago, most of the tribes lived in the mountains and forests. Later on, some tribes walked out of the mountains and forests in search of a more peaceful place to live. Some tribes, although not migrating, cut down the forests around their living areas. After thousands of years, they were separated from the original mountains and forests, and the former forests could not be seen in their original state. Among the tribes that decided to go into the mountains with the Yanjiao, some had ancestors who left the mountains themselves, such as the Longboat tribe. Others, such as the Feather tribe, had deliberately changed their surroundings. No matter which it was, they hadn't felt it in a long time. Moving in a place like this, isolated from the rest of the world, full of ancient trees, wild grass, fearsome beasts, and poisonous insects, was like returning to the most primitive state of savagery. They were wearing clothes made of finely woven linen and silk cloth, which made them feel particularly out of place as they walked. For the people of the various tribes who had always wanted to leave their barbaric state, this was indeed a very special experience. Looking at the 5 Yanjiao people in front of them, they still looked normal. Although they wore clothes made of cloth, most of them were made of animal skin. Normally, they didn't feel anything special, but after entering the mountains, they could clearly feel the changes in the Yanjiao people. They seemed to have blended into the forest, and there was no sense of awkwardness. It was as if these people were born to belong in the mountains. Rather than saying that they were hunters who were good at surviving in the mountains, it was more accurate to say that they were humanoid beasts that roamed freely. Yes, the people of the various tribes were beginning to feel the beastly nature of the Yanjiao people. Especially after seeing Duo Kong tear apart a beast that had pounced down from a tree with his bare hands, the bloody visual impact was even more intense. It was the most primitive, savage nature. This was the real Yanjiao people. Whoosh! A spear pierced through the small gap between the few people in the group, almost brushing past their clothes. The wind made the cloth flap. The spear's high speed seemed to heat up the air, and it made the fine hairs on the people's faces tremble. Poochie, thud. The sound of a sharp weapon piercing through flesh and the sound of a nail piercing into a tree sounded at almost the same time. The people who thought they were going to be pierced by the spear stiffened and slowly twisted their bodies to look in the direction of the sound. There, a strange-looking animal was waving its bamboo-like limbs, twisting its body as if trying to break free. However, a spear pierced through its neck, nailing it to the tree trunk. Brownish-red blood flowed out of the wound. The grayish-brown animal that looked like a dried leopard gradually slowed down its struggling movements until it stopped moving. Looking at the animal's claws, they were like nails. Many people in the group swallowed their saliva. How did it move when it looked like this? Just now, he didn't even hear much of a commotion. By the time he heard the sound and prepared to defend himself, the spear had already arrived. What is that? Someone from the feather, it's a normal beast in the mountains. Xiaofan walked over and pulled out the spear that was nailed to the tree trunk. Don't get scratched by them. They are poisonous. We usually don't eat them. No one asked if they could eat it. Seeing Xiaofan's incomparably calm reaction, many people in the group were already complaining in their hearts. They already lost their appetite when they saw the beast, let alone eat it. In fact, many people in the group had been to the desert. It was reasonable to say that there were many desert beasts. They had experienced the desert and should have been mentally prepared. But the mountains were different from the desert. Killing people was different from killing beasts. In the desert where the slave owners lived, there were too many dead places. Sometimes there were no living creatures. As long as they were a little cautious, they could avoid most of the dangers. But it was different here. There was life everywhere, full of vitality and full of killing intent. It was impossible to guard against. If they had to deal with every kind, they would die of exhaustion. This was the world of fierce beasts. Screech, a few eagle cries came from the sky. The faces of several people from the Hui tribe suddenly changed. They could feel the anxiety from the eagle's cries and wanted to climb up the tree to see what was going on. The foliage here was lush, almost covering the sky above. Only some fine yang-guang shone through the narrow gaps between the leaves. No need to look. Your eagles must have gone the wrong way and entered the territory of other fierce beasts. Xiaofan guessed without looking. Tell them not to fly around and follow the original route. Be honest and don't fight with those fierce beasts. It won't be good if they attract more birds. Xiaofan explained. Gula quickly nodded and climbed up the tree. He whistled to the sky and waited for the giant mountain eagles to fly down. He gave them a few words of advice before returning to the group. In the mountains, there are many places you have to pay attention to. Some areas are surrounded by fierce beasts. Don't wander around. You have to see if you can deal with those beasts. If you enter the territory of a fierce beast that you can't beat and kill its prey, then you're out of luck. Xiaofan led the way while explaining to these people who had never lived in this mountain. If they could learn more about it, they could avoid trouble. But, how do we know where the fierce beasts are and where we can't mess with them? Someone in the group asked. Don't you have us? Xiaofan said, we haven't really entered the heart of the ferocious beast mountain forest yet. We Yinjiao know more about this place. As long as you follow our instructions, you can avoid some unnecessary trouble. So, they had to go wherever the Yinjiao told them to go. The people who heard Xiaofan's words were unhappy, but they could only follow the instructions of the Yinjiao people in the ferocious beast mountain forest. After all, they had no experience surviving in the ferocious beast mountain forest. I just hope you can lead the way. Huang Yi of the Mang tribe said. That's for sure. Don't worry. As soon as Xiaofan's voice fell, they heard cracking sounds not far away. It was the sound of branches and vines breaking, and it was getting closer and closer. A huge beast's head suddenly rose from the ground, emerging from under the crisscrossing vines and branches. The lines on the surface of its body were like cracks on the bark of an ancient tree. Its two huge nostrils were big enough for people to crawl in directly. The low growls of the beast sounded like muffled thunder. Such a huge vicious beast was so close to them, yet it was hidden so well. They didn't feel its breath at all just now. The people in the group glared at Xiaofan. This guy just told them not to worry. What was this? Not to worry, my ass. They almost peed their pants, okay? As if he knew what the people in the group were going to say, Xiaofan lifted his chin and pointed at the fierce beast. Don't just look. Do it. It's tonight's dinner. The others, without waiting for the others' reactions, the 5 Yinjiao people had already picked up their weapons and rushed over. Roar! The giant beast let out a roar of provocation. On the other side, Xiao Xian's group of 5 exploded with their peak totemic power at almost the same time. Their vast auras directly pressed against the fierce beast not far away. Neither man nor beast backed down. The tyrannical auras collided in this cramped place. On the tangled vines, leaves flew out of the vines as if they were suddenly torn off by someone. The dense foliage of the shrubs swayed violently, making rustling sounds like a rainstorm. Under the impact of the 2 auras, those who were close to them could feel the creaking of their bones. It was as if they were a lonely boat under the waves. Once they were in a hunting mode, the Yinjiao people couldn't be distracted. This was what they were best at and loved. When facing people, they had to consider too many things. Many times, it wasn't as if you were stronger than your opponent that you would have a good ending. The human heart was complicated and difficult to understand. This was something the Yinjiao people only understood after coming into contact with other tribes. It was because of this understanding that many Yinjiao people preferred to hunt in the mountains and forests. In times of crisis, it made people's blood boil, and it was a carefree exercise. Perhaps some of the smarter and more cunning beasts would occasionally do something surprising, but that was rare. Most of the time, the beasts relied on their own advantages to start a battle for survival. As a hunter, as long as they were stronger than you, that was enough. It was a simple law of the jungle. The roars of the beasts, the sounds of sharp and blunt weapons hitting each other, and the whirling waves of air, all of the animals hiding in the surroundings were frightened and fled in all directions. The people from the other tribes stood to the side, watching the 5 Yinjiao people use the most direct and barbaric method to hunt. The Yinjiao people were really fierce. Chapter 536. Xiao Xian and the others chose to use the most direct hunting method to intimidate this group of people. Didn't this group of people think that the Yinjiao people were barbaric and violent? Then let them see how barbaric and violent they were, and let them know that once they entered the forest, they shouldn't think too much and be obedient. On the 5th day of entering the forest, a group of more than 60 people walked in the forest. The initial discomfort had passed, and now, these tribes from the Central Plains or the grasslands had begun to understand some of the most basic survival skills in this forest. Above the crisscrossing net of vines, a huge face that was close to 2 meters tall suddenly appeared. 2 pitch-black eyes seemed to be looking in the direction of the team. The whole face was distorted in a somewhat strange way, and it was dyed with a terrifying coldness by the different colors. At first, when they saw this face, many people in the group were frightened and almost attacked. Fortunately, Xiao Xian and the others stopped them in time. Otherwise, everyone would have suffered. But now, seeing this face again, other people in the group felt a little uncomfortable, but they were able to deal with it calmly. The Yinjiao people were right. Sometimes, things that seemed scary on the surface were actually not. Moreover, most of the time, they were listed as objects to be ignored. After the group had all passed through here, the face that suddenly appeared on the net of interwoven vines gradually changed color, like a canvas washed with detergent. Moreover, it folded up, and both sides began to fold at the same time. After a short while, a strangely striped butterfly flew out of the net of vines and flew towards a darker place where the vines were denser and where Yangguang could barely be seen. This was actually a kind of butterfly in the fearsome beast mountain forest. They usually liked to rest on the net of interwoven vines, but when they rested, they usually raised their wings. Only when they sensed unfamiliar people or danger would they suddenly open their wings and flatten them, using the patterns on their wings to scare away people or beasts. If someone attacked it, it would shake its wings, shaking off the powder on its wings that could make people sneeze. Even some of the larger fearsome beasts would sneeze for nearly an hour if they inhaled this powder. After walking for a while, they found a place to rest. Along the way, they had already experienced too much. Originally, they were dissatisfied because the Flaming Horn tribe asked for too much sincerity, but now, their dissatisfaction disappeared completely. At the same time, they were also glad that they chose to give sincerity, instead of entering the mountain themselves like the Tian Shan tribe. He didn't know how the Tian Shan tribe was doing now, but he didn't think it would be any better. There were some small flying insects around them. The Yinjiao people said that they didn't need to pay attention to these small flying insects, so everyone let down their guard and paid more attention to their surroundings. Over the past few days, their clothes, regardless of whether they were made of linen or silk, were stained with sweat, blood of beasts, and mud that masked the smell of grass and other things that were stuck to their bodies. Because there was no time to wash, the temperature in the forest was still high, and everyone was emitting a stench. But even so, they had no choice, because all kinds of beasts in the forest were very sensitive to strange smells and blood. Although they all had a strange smell on them, at least they could hide and not be discovered when they encountered fearsome beasts that they didn't want to face. There were many flying insects the size of sesame seeds around them. They probably smelled the smell on them and didn't disperse for a long time. Instead, more and more of them gathered. "Is this where you usually hunt?" Chu Su raised his hand and waved away the flying insects. "Yeah." Xiaofan replied simply as he chewed on the leftover meat that he had roasted yesterday. The Hui tribe was fine, but for the Mang, 8 Limbs, and other tribes that focused on farming, it was hard for them to understand why the Yinjiao people often ran into the dangerous forest to hunt. Moreover, they ran so far. They had been walking for several days, but they still hadn't left the Yinjiao hunting range. After the Yinjiao tribe came to the old haunt, they opened up 2 hunting routes, and this was one of them. After eating the meat, Xiaofan stood up and looked into the distance. The terrain here wasn't high, but fortunately, there weren't too many trees, so they could see further. There was a stream not far away, and they had just gotten water from there. For the Yinjiao people, drinking directly was no problem. They were used to it anyway, and their bodies could withstand it. But for the other tribes, drinking the water here could cause diarrhea. Xiaofan told them to boil the water before drinking. Xiaofan was about to discuss the next step with Duo Kong and Mai when his ears twitched. His eyes flashed, and his right foot moved back half a step, and his right arm suddenly stretched out. Whoosh! Chu Su and the others, who were not far away, only saw the shadow of a hand flash by. When they looked again, Xiaofan was already holding something in his hand. "This is..." A few people nearby also came over to take a look. It was their first time coming to a place like this, and they still had a lot to learn from the Yinjiao people. Although they didn't like the Yinjiao people's way of doing things, they had to admit that they were far behind the Yinjiao people when it came to survival experience in the fearsome beast forest. So, if they didn't understand, they had to be thick-skinned and ask. Only when they understood could they avoid unnecessary danger and trouble. "Mosquitoes, the kind that suck blood." Xiaofan frowned. He clenched his fist, and carefully moved his index finger and thumb away. The thing in Xiaofan's hand was still struggling. A thin needle that was longer than Xiaofan's pinky finger stretched out and wriggled. Xiaofan accurately pressed his thumb on the thin needle and exerted force with his fingers. There was only a slight bang sound, as if something hard had been broken. Although the sound wasn't loud, and there were even various bird calls from the forest in the distance, it wasn't hard for the people present not to hear it. Seeing this scene, Chu Su and the others' facial muscles twitched violently. What was that bang sound just now? Was that a mosquito's mouth? Why did it sound like a hard needle? Did this thing suck blood too? Are you kidding me? What would it feel like to be stung by it? Xiaofan opened his clenched fist and handed the dead mosquito to Chu Su and the others to study. Just now, he had broken the thin needle that was wriggling like a syringe, which was the mosquito's sucking mouthpart. With its mouthpart broken and being pinched half to death by Xiaofan, the mosquito had long lost its ability to move and would not live for long. Xiaofan handed the intact mosquito corpse to Chu Su and the others so that they could take a good look at this unnoticeable but extremely dangerous creature in the forest. It would also make it easier for him to take action. Chu Su picked up the mosquito corpse and looked at it. Although there were also very powerful mosquitoes where they lived and could suck people dry, compared to this one in front of them, the danger level was not as high. Ignoring the people studying the mosquito, Xiaofan said to Mai and the others, "Something's wrong." Although the group of people were studying the mosquitoes in the forest, they also pricked up their ears and paid attention to Xiaofan's words. After hearing Xiaofan's words, they hurriedly asked, "What's wrong? They shouldn't have appeared at this time." Xiaofan wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Does this weather look like winter?" No one refuted that it was summer. It was so strange, even more serious than last year. Everyone felt uneasy, especially when they were told by the tribe's shaman that there might be unpredictable changes. They were especially worried. In this weather, mosquitoes like this will definitely appear in swarms. Xiaofan said. Swarms? Looking at the dead mosquito and thinking about the mosquito swarms that might appear, the group of people could not help but shiver. Swarms of mosquitoes will appear during the day? Someone asked. What do you think? Xiaofan looked at the mosquito and then glanced at the forest that was blocked by Yangguang. Then what should we do? Someone was anxious. Of course there is a way. You need to apply something, but it might be a little uncomfortable. Just bear with it. You can avoid those mosquitoes after applying it. Listen to me. Xiaofan said and signaled to Tuo. Tuo nodded and then left with Mai. When they reappeared, they had already wrapped some black mud with big leaves, with a strange stench. Looking at the black mud handed over by the Yanjiao people, the faces of the people of several tribes darkened. Where did they dig this out of? What the hell is this? Where did you dig it out from? Do we really have to apply it? Huang Ye's voice was hoarse. Are you kidding us? It's up to you. We're just showing you the way. Xiaofan said indifferently. Then why don't you apply it? Someone argued. Xiaofan and the other 4 people rolled up their sleeves, revealing the lines drawn with paint from their shoulders to their fingers on their arms. We applied it before we came out. We applied it with a mixture of herbs and paint. This is our Yanjiao habit. But we didn't expect that there would be swarms of mosquitoes at this time. We didn't bring much medicine, so you have to make do with this mud. Huang Yi and the others' faces darkened even more. However, for the sake of safety, he endured it and used broken branches to smear the black mud on his body. The smell was so strong that it almost made him tear up. However, at dusk, they knew that Xiaofan really didn't lie to them, and their resentment subsided a little. In the forest ahead, buzzing sounds echoed. Even if they didn't go there, they knew the possible situation over there. They couldn't tell how many mosquitoes there were just by the sound. Let's keep going. There's still some distance to the place where we'll rest tonight. The Yanjiao leading the way didn't stop, so the people behind had to keep up. The buzzing sounds in their ears were getting louder and louder. They could clearly hear the flapping of the mosquitoes' wings as they flew by, stimulating everyone's eardrums. Everyone's tense nerves jumped. Although the light was dim, with their eyesight, they could still see the needle-like mouths on the mosquitoes. There were too many of them. The mosquito swarms in front of them were almost all over the forest. From the ground to the branches above, they were all flying mosquitoes. They all blocked their sight. However, every time a mosquito flew by, it would avoid the people walking over and wouldn't jump up to bite them. Everyone's hanging hearts gradually relaxed. The breath they had been holding in was also slowly released. I told you, we're right to listen to us. Xiaofan, who was leading the way in front, said. Chapter 537. The team rested in the cave they had planned for the night. They had found this cave when they were hunting, but it was too small to store bigger prey. After comparing a few places, Yanjiao's hunting team chose another place as their resting point, and this one was used as a backup. Xiaofan and the others would not take these people to the resting place of their own hunting team. They could only come here, or they could sleep in the open. Only idiots would lead these people to their own secret base. Xiaofan did not trust these people. They set up the firewood and boiled some water in a stone pot they made temporarily. Then they boiled a pot of soup and roasted some meat. In the forest outside the cave, there were some squeaking noises echoing in the air. He didn't know what it was, but it sounded creepy. The mud on their bodies had already coagulated, but they did not dare to take it off because they did not know if they would encounter more mosquito swarms later. Fortunately, the smell of the black mud had faded a little after it had coagulated. Even if it had not faded, they felt that it was bearable now. As the saying goes, one does not know how bad it is after smelling it for a long time. At first, some people were worried that Xiaofan was playing a prank on them by giving them some mud with feces. Later they found out that the black mud came from some pits near the stream, because there was a kind of animal that liked to eat mosquitoes living in those pits. Therefore, mosquitoes were disgusted by the smell of the black mud, and would automatically avoid it when they smelled it. After knowing the truth, they felt a lot calmer. But what they did not know was that many animals that went to drink water in the pits where the black mud was produced would also be dragged into those pits. Although the Yanjiao people looked serious, they were actually laughing in their hearts. "What is that?" Chu Su said, pointing at the foot of the mountain. Xiaofan looked down the mountain. In the dark, there were some shining curves in the forest, winding to the distance. There was a small river there, and those shining things were actually some small creatures living by the river. At night, they would float from the bottom of the river and gather near the river bank. The light they emitted would attract some animals that were attracted to the light. When those animals touched the water, they would find that they were glued to the water and unable to break free. In the end, they would be dragged into the water and eaten. "Don't go there. They will eat you," Xiaofan said. Not every place that glowed was a channel that produced gems. Some places were absolutely dangerous, especially in a mountain forest like this. On the 15th day in the forest, the team had already left Yanjiao's hunting area and entered the heart of the fearsome beast forest. They had to be more careful as they went forward, because the 5 Yanjiao people did not have much to guide them. No one knew what would be in front of them. The team slowed down. Xiaofan, Duokong, Mai, and the other 4 gathered together. It looked like they were discussing something, but in reality, the other 4 were covering for Xiaofan. They had seen too many Yanjiao people like this over the past few days, so they were already used to it. Therefore, the people from the other 6 tribes did not pay much attention to it and gathered together to discuss. In a place where no one could see, Xiaofan was quickly tying a knot on a straw rope in his hand. When Xiaofan opened his eyes and looked at the rope that was finally tied, he read the hints given by the knots. Xiaofan pointed in a direction. "Over there." The Yanjiao people had just finished discussing the direction when they heard a slightly arrogant voice say, "This old man has observed the weather and predicted that there will be rain tomorrow. At the latest, it will be the day after tomorrow, and it will not be light. It may even last for 2 to 3 days. How do you plan to deal with it?" Xiaofan looked at the person who spoke. It was an elder of the Longboat tribe named Mu. Along the way, he had heard him talk about observing the weather several times. The day before yesterday, he had even said that there would be no rain in 3 days. In fact, ever since they entered the forest, it had not really rained. Even if it did, it was just a small dot. Most of the time, it was sunny, and the temperature was getting higher. Looking at the other tribesmen, they seemed to believe Muyu's words. The four Yinjiao people glanced at the old man who was sitting there pretending to be deep in thought, then looked at Xiaoxian. They did not believe anyone but Xiaoxian. Xiaoxian shook his head. The arrogance on Mu Yu's face became even more obvious. He felt that when it came to observing the weather, no one here could compare to him. Perhaps the Yinjiao shamans had similar abilities, but that was different. The shamans used shaman power, while he relied on his rich personal experience. Moreover, there was no shaman here. The longboat tribe spent most of the year on boats, traveling along the river, so they were more knowledgeable. Observing the weather was a skill that many crew members had to learn. They could judge the weather early, and they could also prepare in advance to reduce losses. Finally, they had a chance to show off their strengths. The longboat tribe also felt a sense of relief. No matter how good the Yinjiao people's survival skills were in the fearsome beast forest, they could not judge the weather a few days in advance, right? These days, they had not heard them talk about it. At most, they could predict the next day's weather from the evening or night sky. They also thought that Xiaoxian's action of shaking his head meant that he did not know the weather. The other tribes were discussing finding a place to take shelter from the rain in advance. They were prepared to hide for 2 or 3 days. They did not want to walk in the rain in this forest. The four Yinjiao people knew that when Xiaoxian shook his head, he was actually saying, "Don't listen to his nonsense." There was no rain. Continue in the direction of the divination. Therefore, from the moment they entered the forest until now, this was the first time they had such a big disagreement. Yinjiao wanted to continue in the direction they had decided, while the other 6 tribes were more inclined to the longboat tribe's decision. They wanted to find a place to take shelter from the rain first. Well, Xiaoxian was not angry. He said in a calm tone, "This place is beyond the range we are familiar with. We have done our duty of leading the way. If you have other decisions, we will not object. But we will still follow our own plan." "Wait, we will go with you," Gula hurriedly said. Since the Hui tribe had cooperated with Yinjiao and chosen the Yinjiao side, they should not betray them at this time. Moreover, Gula also felt that it was better to follow the Yinjiao. At worst, they would get wet in the rain. But the eagles in the sky would suffer. They did not like to get wet in the rain. The people of the Mang tribe looked at each other. Chu Su said, "Then let's go together. The Mang tribe is not familiar with the forest. We hope that the Yinjiao brothers can help us." Huang Yi, the leader of the Mang tribe, did not say anything, which meant that he agreed with Chu Su's decision. Although he felt that Mu Yu was right, at the same time, after 10 days of observation, he felt that the Yinjiao people's beast-like intuition was very rare and worth studying. Just as Chu Su said, in this forest, it was better to observe how the Yinjiao people acted. The people of the 8 Limbs tribe looked at each other. But since the people of the Mang tribe were on their side, they could not stay on the Longboat tribe's side. It was better to cooperate with the Mang tribe. The people of the Thousand Masks tribe did not say anything. They took big steps towards the Yinjiao side, which made Mu Yu's eyebrows twitch. Seeing this situation, the Feather tribe's determination to stand on the Longboat side was shaken. "No, it's over. There are only a few of us here. We will definitely be at a disadvantage." So Guji, the leader of the Feather tribe, sighed. He smiled apologetically to Mu Yu and led his people to stand on the Yinjiao side. The people of the Longboat tribe. How could they choose in this situation? Anyway, they would definitely not choose to be alone. So Mu Yu, with a pale face, continued to follow the Yinjiao side with the others. "Why did you choose this direction?" Huang Yi asked Xiaoxian. "Because I think we can find the slaves of Rock Hill City here," Xiaoxian said. Behind him, Mu Yu snorted. His voice was neither soft nor loud, but it could be heard. Xiaoxian's face did not change at all, as if he did not hear the sarcastic snort. He led his people and continued to walk. The next day, blue sky, white clouds, and scorching sun. It did not look like it was going to rain. Mu Yu's face became uncomfortable. On the third day, the sun was shining in the sky. The scorching sun was still scorching the earth. Mu Yu was quite uncomfortable. He kept his eyelids down and did not look at anyone. The people of the Longboat tribe did not say anything. They pretended to be dumb. On the fourth day, it still did not look like it was going to rain. However, no one was in the mood to make fun of Mu Yu. After entering the heart of the fearsome beast mountain forest, the sense of crisis was even stronger. They did not want to be distracted. What Xiaofan did not explain was that the weather in the fearsome beast mountain forest changed too quickly. The closer they got to the heart of the forest, the more unpredictable it was. If Yang Sui of the Rain tribe was here, he might be able to make some predictions in advance. The people of the Longboat tribe? Forget it. Their experience was accumulated under normal circumstances. It might not be applicable here. Moreover, Xiaofan felt that the weather was getting hotter and hotter. It was already out of the ordinary and unpredictable. Even if Xiaofan learned to observe the sky from others, he could not accurately predict the weather unless he used not divination. Xiaofan would not say these explanations. He would not give Mu Yu a way out. Who asked him to be so arrogant before? In the forest, the insects hiding among the leaves were noisy. Xian Mai, who came down from the tree, pointed in a direction with a serious look. Xiaofan jumped up the tree and looked in the direction Mai pointed. Not far ahead, there were some gray figures flying among the verdant green. What's wrong? Gula asked. Let's go ahead and take a look. Those gray figures were a type of scavenger bird. When Xiaofan arrived, the ground was almost covered in a layer of gray. Sensing people coming over, the gray figures shouted and flew into the sky in flocks. The layer of gray that originally covered the ground was also removed. There were the bones of a fearsome beast on the ground, as well as a few human bones. Whether it was the humans or the fearsome beast, their original appearance could no longer be seen. Less than 1/5 of their bodies were eaten. There was a broken spear stuck in one of the bones. The spearhead was made of metal and not stone. It's those slaves? Seeing this, the people of several tribes were delighted. The flaming horns were right. As they walked in this direction, they actually found the group of slaves sent by Rock Hill City. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.